A woman, 6 children, 0 options. When Clara Whitmore's husband vanished into the Montana wilderness with everything they owned, she had 3 days before starvation won. Then a cowboy rode up to her collapsing homestead with an offer that sounded too good to be true, and a past dark enough to make her wonder if survival was worth the price. This is the story of how the frontier's cruelest winter became one woman's second chance at everything. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The Montana dawn came without mercy. Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway of the cabin she'd once called home, watching frost creep across the porch boards like skeletal fingers. The silence was wrong. She'd known it the moment her eyes opened in the darkness, known it in the hollow pit of her stomach before her mind caught up to what her body already understood. Thomas was gone. Not gone to check the traps. Not gone to the trading post in Ashford, though that's what the rational part of her brain kept whispering, desperate for any explanation that didn't shatter her world into pieces. No, this was a different kind of gone, the kind that left echoes in empty spaces, the kind that took everything with it. Clara's bare feet were numb against the cold wood, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Behind her in the cabin's single room, 6 children still slept in the pre-dawn darkness. 6 sets of lungs breathing in rhythm, 6 lives depending on her, and she stood frozen like a fool, staring at nothing. The wagon was gone. She'd checked the lean-to twice already, as if it might magically reappear if she just looked hard enough. The 2 horses, gone. The winter stores they'd spent 4 months accumulating, gone. The cash box Thomas kept hidden under the floorboard near the stove, gone. All that remained was a letter. Clara's hand trembled as she unfolded it again, though she'd already read it so many times the words had burned themselves into her memory. Thomas's handwriting, usually so careful and precise, sprawled across the page in jagged lines. Clara, I can't do this anymore. The land won't give. The children won't stop needing. You won't stop looking at me like I'm failing, even though we both know I am. I'm sorry. I tried. I can't watch them starve because I'm not man enough to make this work. Maybe you'll find a way. You're stronger than me. You always were. Thomas stronger than him. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She crumpled the letter in her fist, then smoothed it out again, hating herself for the gesture. It was evidence. Proof. The only thing standing between her and people calling her a liar when she said her husband had abandoned his family. Mama? Clara turned. Sarah stood in the doorway, all of 8 years old, wrapped in a blanket too thin for October in Montana. Her daughter's dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and her eyes, Thomas's eyes, sharp and questioning, were already too knowing for a child. Go back to bed, sweetheart. Papa's gone, isn't he? The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to lie, to protect, to do what mothers did. But Sarah's expression stopped her. The girl already knew. Maybe they all knew. Children sensed things, felt the earthquakes in their parents' silences. Yes, Clara said quietly. He's gone. Sarah nodded once, a small, terrible gesture of acceptance. Are we going to die? The question should have shocked Clara, should have made her rush to comfort, to reassure, to promise everything would be fine. But she'd never lied to her children about the realities of frontier life, and she wouldn't start now. Not if I can help it, Clara said. Now go wake your brothers and sisters. We need to take inventory. Sarah disappeared back into the cabin without another word. Clara listened to her daughter's careful footsteps, the soft murmurs as she roused the others. Sweet girl, responsible girl, too responsible for 8. That's what happened when you lived on the edge of nothing. Children grew up fast, or they didn't grow up at all. Clara forced herself to move, forced her frozen feet back across the threshold. The cabin felt smaller in the growing light, the walls pressing in. 1 room, 14 by 16 feet. A cast-iron stove in the corner, cold now because they'd been rationing firewood. 2 rope beds, one for Clara and Thomas, one for the children to share. A rough table Thomas had built their first year. 3 chairs because they'd never had enough money for more. A trunk containing their spare clothes, what little they had. And 6 children, ranging from infant to adolescent, all staring at her with varying degrees of comprehension. "All right," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "Let's see what we have." The inventory took an hour and revealed a reality so bleak that Clara felt her hands shaking as she scratched numbers onto the back of Thomas's letter. 2 jars of preserves, 1 sack of cornmeal, maybe 10 pounds, a handful of potatoes, already sprouting, 6 eggs, a quarter wheel of cheese, hard and cracking, some dried beans, not enough, no meat, no flour, no salt, no coffee, not that the children needed it, but Clara felt the lack like a wound. In the corner of the cabin, wrapped in her oldest blanket, little Rebecca, just 6 months old, began to fuss. Clara's milk had been drying up for weeks, her body too depleted to produce what the baby needed. She'd been supplementing with goat's milk, but the goat was gone now. Thomas had taken it. Of course he'd taken it. "Mama, I'm hungry," said William, 4 years old and all elbows and knees. His older brother James, 10, elbowed him sharply. "Hush," James hissed. "Can't you see Mama's thinking?" "But I'm hungry now." Clara crossed to the stove, her mind calculating. If she was careful, if she was very, very careful, she could stretch what they had for maybe a week, 2 if they ate like mice. After that, she didn't let herself finish the thought. "Sarah, help me with breakfast," Clara said. "James, I need you to check the snare line. Take Michael with you." Michael, 7 years old and skinny as a rail, perked up. "Can I carry the rifle?" "There is no rifle," Clara said flatly. "Your father took it." The words fell into silence. Even William stopped fidgeting. James stood slowly, his young face hardening in a way that made Clara's chest ache. "What kind of man," he said quietly, "leaves his family with nothing?" "James, no, Mama, what kind of man does that?" Clara had no answer. She busied herself with the stove, coaxing the dying embers back to life with some kindling from their dwindling pile. Behind her, she heard James storm out, Michael scrambling after him. The morning passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Clara made a thin cornmeal mush, stretching it with water until it was barely more than paste. The children ate without complaint, even when their bowls were still half empty. Even William, who usually whined about everything, scraped his bowl clean in silence. By mid-morning, James and Michael returned empty-handed. No rabbits, no squirrels, nothing. "Traps were sprung," James reported, his jaw tight. "Something took the bait and ran." "Did you reset them?" "With what?" "Papa took the wire." Of course he had. Clara sent the children outside, all except Rebecca, who dozed fitfully in her basket, and stood alone in the cabin, letting herself feel the full weight of their situation for exactly 1 minute. She'd learned this trick years ago. Contain the panic, give it a boundary, then lock it away and keep moving. 60 seconds to admit that she was 31 years old, alone, and responsible for 6 lives in a landscape that killed people for sport. 60 seconds to acknowledge that winter was coming, that they had no money, no transportation, no weapons, and almost no food. 60 seconds to face the possibility that Sarah's question this morning might not have an answer. Then the minute was up, and Clara Whitmore did what she'd always done. She got to work. She spent the afternoon walking the property, looking for anything useful. Their homestead sat in a shallow valley about 8 miles from Ashford, the nearest town. Thomas had chosen the location for its water access. A creek ran along the eastern boundary, but the land itself was stubborn. Rocky soil, sparse grass, trees too twisted and small for good lumber. They'd lasted 3 years here. 3 years of Thomas's increasingly desperate attempts to make the land produce. 3 years of crop failures and harsh winters, and children going to bed hungry more often than not. Clara had tried to help, had worked herself to exhaustion, planting and hauling and mending, but it was never enough. And now Thomas had decided it would never be enough. And he'd left. The coward's way out, she thought bitterly, yanking a handful of wild onions from the creek bank. Run away and let someone else deal with the consequences. By the time she returned to the cabin, the sun was dropping toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of rust and gold. Beautiful. Montana was always beautiful, right up until it killed you. The children were subdued through dinner, more thin mush, this time with the wild onions chopped in for flavor. Clara portioned it carefully, giving herself the smallest share and pretending not to notice when Sarah tried to give half of hers back. "Eat," Clara said firmly. "All of it. After the children were asleep, Clara sat at the table with the last candle burning down to nothing. She had Thomas's letter spread in front of her, along with a stub of pencil and the back of an old feed bill. She was making lists because lists were concrete, manageable, something to hold on to when everything else was falling apart. Options. 1. Walk to Ashford, find work. But doing what? And who would hire a woman with 6 children in tow? The town had maybe 300 people, most of them struggling just as hard as she was. There were no factories here, no shops needing help. This was ranching country, and ranch work required a kind of strength Clara didn't have anymore. 2. Ask for charity. The thought made her throat close. She'd starve before she begged. Pride, Thomas used to call it. Stupidity, he'd said more than once. Maybe he was right. Maybe her pride would kill them all. 3. Write to her family back east. Even if they wanted to help, and that was a generous assumption, it would take weeks for a letter to arrive, weeks more for any response. They didn't have weeks. 4. Sell the homestead. To whom? For what? The land was barely worth the filing fee Thomas had paid 3 years ago. And even if she could find a buyer, she'd be trading one form of destitution for another, with no plan for what came after. Clara stared at the list until the words blurred. 4 options, and none of them viable. She was trapped in a cage made of circumstances and bad decisions, and the absolute certainty that she was responsible for 6 lives that depended on her not giving up. The candle guttered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. Clara didn't move. She sat there in the blackness, listening to her children breathe, and allowed herself one single thought that she'd been pushing away all day. We're not going to make it. The thought settled over her like snow, cold and suffocating and inevitable. 3 days later, Clara was down to her last jar of preserves and a quarter sack of cornmeal when the riders came. She was outside trying to figure out if the chicken coop could be salvaged for firewood when she heard the horses. 2 of them, moving at an easy walk up the trail from Ashford. Clara's first instinct was to grab the children and hide. Strangers meant danger out here. But she was too tired for fear, and besides, what would be the point? If someone wanted to rob them, they'd find nothing worth taking. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and waited. The riders crested the small rise that separated the cabin from the main trail. Both men, both weathered in the way that frontier life weathered everyone. The first was older, maybe 60, with a gray beard and eyes that assessed everything. The second was younger, perhaps 40, tall in the saddle with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. They reined in about 20 feet from where Clara stood. "Ma'am," the older man said, tipping his hat. "Name's Frank Howell. This here's Ethan Caldwell. We're looking for Thomas Whitmore." Clara's laugh came out sharp and bitter. "You and me both." The 2 men exchanged a glance. Ethan, the younger one, leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "He's not here?" "He's been gone 3 days. Took the wagon, the horses, the winter stores, and every cent we had. Left me and 6 children with nothing." Clara lifted her chin, defiant even in her desperation. "So if you're here to collect a debt, you're out of luck." Frank Howell's expression softened. "We're not here for money, ma'am. Tom worked for Mr. Caldwell's ranch last spring. Did some breaking and fence work. He told us if we ever needed an extra hand to come find him." "Well, he's not here to be found," Clara said flatly. "Is there anything else?" Ethan Caldwell dismounted in one smooth motion. Up close, Clara could see that he was younger than she'd first thought. Late 30s, maybe. There were lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting against sun and wind, and a scar along his jaw that spoke of old violence. But his eyes, when they met hers, were steady and strangely gentle. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice low and even, "when's the last time your family had a decent meal?" The question was so unexpected, so direct, that Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "That's none of your concern." "It is if I'm making it my concern. I don't want your charity." "Good. I'm not offering charity." Ethan glanced past her at the cabin, taking in the sagging roof, the empty lean-to, the general air of abandonment. "I'm offering work. My ranch is about 12 miles north of here. We've got a bunkhouse that's sitting empty, a kitchen that could use help, and more work than 3 men can handle before the snow comes. You want to earn your keep, there's room for you and your children. Clara stared at him. You don't even know me. I know Tom Whitmore was a decent hand, but a poor homesteader. I know he talked about his family when he worked for me. I know you've got 6 children and no way to feed them. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his voice softened. And I know what it's like to be out of options. Why would you do this? Clara demanded. What's in it for you? Honest labor for honest pay, nothing more. Ethan paused, then added, But I won't lie to you, Mrs. Whitmore. Winter's coming fast. If you stay here, you and your children won't make it to Christmas. That's just the truth of it. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she'd find a way, that she didn't need some stranger's pity or his so-called generosity. But the words wouldn't come because they both knew he was right. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Sarah stood in the doorway, Rebecca on her hip, the other children crowding behind her. Mama? Sarah's voice was small. Who are they? Clara looked at her daughter, at all of them, her 6 reasons for living, and felt something crack inside her chest. Pride. Fear. The last stubborn belief that she could do this alone. She turned back to Ethan Caldwell. What kind of work? Cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever needs doing. The hands are decent men, but they've been living like animals for too long. Your children old enough to work can help with chores, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, learning stock. The younger ones just need to stay safe and out of the way. He paused. I pay fair wages, room and board included. And nobody touches a hair on any of their heads. You have my word on that. Clara studied his face, looking for the lie, the trick, the hidden cost. But all she saw was a man who'd made an offer and was waiting for her answer. She thought about the empty preserves jar, about William's hollow cheeks, about the way James had started looking at her lately with a kind of desperate hope that broke her heart because she had nothing to give him. She thought about 3 more days, maybe 4 before the food ran out completely. She thought about the Montana winter bearing down on them like a wolf. All right, Claire heard herself say. We'll come. Tom. They left within the hour. There was almost nothing to pack, just the spare clothes in the trunk, a few blankets, the empty preserves jars that Clara couldn't quite bring herself to leave behind. Everything that mattered in Clara's life fit into 2 saddlebags and a canvas sack. Frank Howell had ridden back to town to fetch a wagon. Can't have the little ones walking 12 miles, he'd said gruffly, already turning his horse. Clara had wanted to protest, to say they could manage. But the truth was that Michael's shoes were falling apart, and Rebecca was too heavy for anyone to carry that far. While they waited, Ethan helped James and Michael dismantle the snare line, what was left of it, and check the cabin one last time for anything useful. Clara watched him work with her sons, patient and methodical, showing them how to coil rope properly and explaining which tools were worth salvaging. Your boys are good workers, Ethan said when they returned, rope and a rusted hammer in hand. They've had to be, Clara replied. There was no judgment in Ethan's expression, just acknowledgement. He handed the tools to James. Hang on to these. Always need good rope and a decent hammer. When Frank returned with the wagon, a sturdy work vehicle that made Clara's throat tight with gratitude she couldn't voice, they loaded up quickly. The children climbed into the bed without being asked, even William, who usually complained about everything. Sarah held Rebecca, and the others arranged themselves around the few belongings, quiet and watchful. Clara climbed onto the bench seat beside Frank, who clucked to the horses. Ethan rode alongside on his own mount, silent and watchful. As they pulled away from the cabin, Clara didn't look back. There was nothing there worth remembering, just 3 years of struggle and one morning when she'd woken to find herself abandoned. The ride to Caldwell's ranch took most of the afternoon. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, following creek beds and rising into foothills where the air smelled like snow. The children grew drowsy in the warm October sun, lulled by the wagon's rhythm. Even Rebecca slept, her small fist curled against Sarah's chest. Clara used the time to study Ethan Caldwell as unobtrusively as she could. He rode like a man born to it, easy in the saddle, one hand loose on the reins. Every so often he'd scan the tree line or the ridges above them, not nervous, just aware. A man who'd learned to watch his surroundings. Known Ethan long? Clara asked Frank quietly. The older man smiled. Going on 15 years, good man. Fair boss. Doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's worth listening to. Does he make a habit of collecting strays? Frank's smile widened. First time I've seen it, ma'am. But then, Ethan's not one to ignore people who need help. Lost his own family young, parents to fever, sister to childbirth. Knows what it's like to be alone. Clara absorbed this information silently. It explained something about the man, that quiet offer, that lack of judgment. He understood desperate circumstances because he'd lived them. What about the ranch? She asked. 300 head of cattle, good grazing land, water rights to Copper Creek. Ethan built it from nothing over the last decade. Works hard, expects the same from his men. But he's fair, like I said. You do right by him. He'll do right by you. The sun was starting its descent when they crested a final rise, and Clara got her first look at the ranch that was apparently going to be her home. It sat in a broad valley, protected on 3 sides by pine-covered ridges. The main house was a low, sprawling structure of logs and stone, with a wide porch and a stone chimney from which smoke rose in a lazy column. Behind it, she could see a barn, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and what must be the bunkhouse, a long, narrow building with its own chimney. It was modest by some standards, but to Clara's eyes, it looked like a castle. That's the bunkhouse where you'll stay, Frank said, pointing. Ethan had it built 2 years ago for the hands, but they prefer sleeping in the barn most of the time. Says it's warmer with the horses. He chuckled. More likely they just like being able to spit tobacco wherever they please. As they rolled into the yard, 2 men emerged from the barn. The ranch hands, Clara assumed. Both young, early 20s maybe, lean and weathered. They watched the wagon with open curiosity. Ethan dismounted and walked over to them, speaking too low for Clara to hear. Whatever he said made both men nod and head back toward the barn without approaching the wagon. Giving them instructions, Frank murmured, making sure they know to keep their distance and mind their manners. Ethan returned to the wagon and helped Clara down. His hand was calloused but steady, and he released her the moment her feet touched ground. Let me show you the bunkhouse, he said. Get you and the children settled before dark. The bunkhouse was better than Clara had dared hope. 1 large room with a potbelly stove at each end, 6 narrow beds along one wall, a table with benches, and shelves for storage. It was clean, surprisingly clean, and when Ethan lit the stoves, warmth began to fill the space immediately. Kitchen's in the main house, Ethan said, gesturing vaguely toward the door. You're welcome to use it any time. For now, I'll have Frank bring over some stew and bread. Tomorrow we'll work out the details of what needs doing. Clara nodded, overwhelmed by the simple fact of being warm and inside and safe. The children tumbled out of the wagon, exploring their new quarters with the resilient curiosity of the young. William found a small shelf and immediately claimed it as his. Michael discovered that one of the beds was near a window and announced he'd take that one. James, ever practical, started organizing their few belongings. Sarah stood close to Clara, Rebecca still in her arms. Mama, she whispered, is this real? I think so, sweetheart. Are we staying? Clara looked around the bunkhouse, at the sturdy walls, the warm stoves, the beds that were narrow but clean. At her children, no longer quite so hollow-eyed, already starting to relax in ways they hadn't in weeks. For now, Clara said. For now, we're staying. True to his word, Frank brought stew and bread within the hour. The stew was thick with meat and vegetables, rich enough to make Clara's mouth water, and there was enough of it to fill all of them properly for the first time in days. The children ate like wolves, quietly but intensely, scraping their bowls clean. Clara made herself eat slowly, her shrunken stomach protesting the sudden abundance. Across the table, Sarah fed Rebecca tiny bites of bread soaked in broth, patient and gentle. Mama, William said around a mouthful of stew, can we have more? Mind your manners, Clara said automatically, but she was already reaching for the pot. There was more, plenty more. She served William a second helping, then served the others when they asked. By the time they finished, full dark had fallen outside. The stoves kept the bunkhouse warm, and the children were drooping where they sat. All right, Clara said, standing. Beds, everyone. For once, there was no argument. The children peeled off to their chosen bunks, Sarah helping the younger ones with their shoes and blankets. Within 20 minutes, they were all down, even James, who usually fought sleep like an enemy. Clara stood in the center of the room, listening to them breathe. In sleep, they looked younger, softer, less burdened by the weight of survival. She allowed herself to feel what she hadn't let herself feel all day: relief. They were fed, they were warm, they were safe, at least for tonight. It wasn't forever, it wasn't even close to a solution, but it was something, and something was infinitely better than the nothing she'd been facing 3 days ago. Clara banked the stoves, checked each child one last time, and finally lay down in the bed nearest the door. The mattress was thin but clean, and the blanket smelled like lye soap and sunshine. She was asleep in minutes. She woke in the deep hours of the night to the sound of Rebecca fussing. Clara rose quietly, not wanting to wake the others, and lifted the baby from the basket where Sarah had settled her. Rebecca was hungry. Of course she was. Clara's milk had been failing for weeks now, and one good meal wouldn't change that. She was trying to soothe the baby, rocking her gently and humming under her breath, when there was a soft knock at the door. Clara froze, instinctively protective. But then Ethan's voice came through the wood, low and careful. "Mrs. Whitmore? I heard the baby. I've got something that might help." Clara wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and opened the door a crack. Ethan stood in the darkness, holding a small pail. "Milk," he said. "Fresh from this evening, still warm. Thought the little one might need it." Clara stared at him. "You brought milk, in the middle of the night." "Couldn't sleep anyway." He handed her the pail. "There's a clean bottle and rag in the kitchen if you need them." Before Clara could respond, he turned and walked back toward the main house, disappearing into the darkness. Clara stood in the doorway, holding the pail of milk, feeling something strange and uncomfortable in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but also wariness. Nobody did things like this. Fed your family, gave you shelter, brought milk in the dead of night without wanting something in return. She told herself to be careful, to watch for the angle, the catch, the price that would eventually come due. But Rebecca was crying, and the milk was warm, and Clara was so tired of being suspicious of kindness. She went inside, prepared a bottle, and fed her daughter while the other children slept on, unaware. Tomorrow, Clara thought, she'd start earning her keep. She'd work harder than she'd ever worked, prove that she wasn't charity, wasn't a burden. She'd find a way to repay this debt, whatever it took. But tonight, she let herself feel grateful, just for tonight. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee. For a moment, disoriented in the gray pre-dawn light, she thought she was back in the cabin with Thomas moving around the stove. Then reality settled over her like a cold blanket. Thomas was gone. She was in a stranger's bunkhouse, and she'd just accepted charity from a man she didn't know. She sat up quickly, her heart hammering. Around her, the children still slept, bundled in their blankets. Through the window, she could see lamplight glowing in the main house. Clara dressed quietly, braided her hair with practiced efficiency, and slipped outside. The morning air bit at her face, sharp with the promise of winter. Frost glittered on the ground, and her breath came in white puffs. She crossed the yard to the main house, drawn by that coffee smell and the gnawing anxiety that if she didn't start proving her worth immediately, Ethan Caldwell might change his mind about this arrangement. The kitchen door was unlocked. Clara pushed it open and stopped short. The room was larger than her entire cabin had been, with a massive cast-iron stove, a long work table, shelves lined with supplies, and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. Ethan stood at the stove pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked up when she entered, unsurprised. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's fresh." Clara nodded stiffly. "I came to start work. You said you needed help with cooking and cleaning." "Sun's not even up yet." "I'm awake. Might as well be useful." She moved toward the stove, all business. "What time do your men eat breakfast?" Ethan studied her for a long moment, then set down his cup. "Frank and the two hands, Cooper and Sam, they eat around 6. But Mrs. Whitmore, you just got here yesterday. You're allowed to settle in before—" "I don't want to settle in," Clara interrupted. "I want to work. That was the arrangement. Work for wages and room and board. So put me to work." Something flickered in Ethan's expression. Respect maybe, or understanding. He nodded toward the shelves. "Eggs are in the cold box outside. Bacon's in the smokehouse. There's flour and salt in the pantry, lard in the blue crock. Frank likes his eggs over easy, Cooper wants his scrambled, and Sam doesn't care as long as there's plenty of it. Clara rolled up her sleeves. How many biscuits? As many as you can make. These men work hard. They eat like it. For the next hour, Clara worked with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. She built up the fire in the stove, mixed biscuit dough, sliced bacon, cracked eggs. Her hands remembered the rhythms even though the kitchen was unfamiliar. Years of feeding a family had taught her efficiency, if nothing else. Ethan stayed out of her way, sitting at the far end of the table with his coffee and a ledger book, occasionally making notes. He didn't hover or offer unsolicited advice, and Clara was grateful for that. She didn't need managing. She needed to work. At 6 sharp, Frank arrived with Cooper and Sam in tow. All 3 men stopped short when they saw the table laden with food, platters of bacon and eggs, a basket of golden biscuits, butter, jam, coffee. Well, I'll be damned, Frank said, grinning. Caldwell, you didn't say you'd hired a miracle worker. Language, Frank, Ethan said mildly, and sit down before it gets cold. The men needed no further encouragement. They fell on the food with the appetite of men who'd been living on their own, cooking for too long. Clara stood back, watching anxiously as they ate, cataloging every reaction. Cooper, a lanky kid with red hair and a sunburned nose, took a bite of biscuit and closed his eyes. Ma'am, he said reverently, these are the best biscuits I've had since my mama died. They're just biscuits, Clara said, uncomfortable with the praise. They're not just biscuits, Sam corrected. He was older than Cooper, maybe 25, with dark hair and quiet eyes. They're proof there's still good in the world. Despite herself, Clara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. These men were ridiculous, but they were also eating everything she'd made, going back for seconds and thirds, and the sight of food being appreciated rather than rationed filled something hollow in her chest. Mrs. Whitmore, Ethan said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. Sit, eat. I should check on the children. The children are still asleep. You've been on your feet for 2 hours. Sit. It wasn't a request. Clara sat, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how her back ached and her hands trembled slightly from the unfamiliar exertion of cooking for quantity rather than scarcity. Frank pushed a plate toward her, already loaded with food. Eat, ma'am. Can't have you fainting on us. Clara ate, slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm as her stomach reminded her that one good meal yesterday didn't undo weeks of deprivation. The men talked around her, cattle, fence repairs, weather predictions, and she let their voices wash over her, strangely comforting in their normalcy. When breakfast was finished, Frank and the hands headed out to start their day's work. Cooper paused at the door. Ma'am, he said shyly, thank you for the food. It was real good. You're welcome, Clara said, and meant it. After they left, Clara began clearing the table. Ethan stood to help, but she waved him off. I've got it. You must have work to do. I do, but Mrs. Whitmore, we should talk about the arrangement. Wages, expectations, that sort of thing. Clara kept her hands busy, stacking plates. What are you paying? Room and board plus $15 a month. More if you take on laundry for the hands. They'll pay extra for that. $15. It was more than Clara had expected, more than she'd seen in cash in months. Her throat tightened. That's generous, she managed. It's fair. You'll earn it. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Meals 3 times a day for 4 men, keeping the house clean, mending when needed. Your older children can help with lighter chores around the ranch if they're willing. We'll pay them too, smaller amounts but fair. The younger ones just need to stay safe and out from underfoot when we're working stock. Clara nodded, processing. And if it doesn't work out? If you decide you don't need us? Then I'll give you a month's wages and help you find something else. But I don't expect that to happen. He paused. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not looking for reasons to send you away. I'm looking for help. If you're willing to give it, we'll all manage fine. Why? The question burst out before Clara could stop it. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, When I was 19, my parents died of fever. Left me and my sister with nothing but a failing farm and more debt than we could pay. A rancher named Dutch Henriksen gave me work when nobody else would, taught me the cattle business, helped me get on my feet. When I asked him why, he said some people need help and some people can give it. And when those two things line up, you don't question it. You just do what's right. Clara absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. What happened to your sister? Died in childbirth 5 years ago, her and the baby both. Ethan's voice was flat, factual. So I know what it's like to lose people, and I know what it's like to be alone. I'm not doing this out of pity, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm doing it because I can, and because you need it, and because maybe Dutch Henriksen was right about how the world's supposed to work. Before Clara could respond, the bunkhouse door banged open, and William's voice carried across the yard. Mama! Mama! Where are you? Clara moved to the doorway. I'm here, sweetheart. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. William ran toward her, Michael and the others trailing behind. Mama, there are chickens, real chickens. Can we gather the eggs? Despite everything, Clara smiled. Ask Mr. Caldwell. It's his ranch. 6 pairs of eyes turned to Ethan expectantly. He cleared his throat. The hen house is that small building past the barn. Gather what you find and bring them here. Be gentle with the birds. The children scattered like dandelion seeds, even Sarah, who usually acted too old for excitement. Only James hung back, his young face serious. Sir, he said to Ethan, I'd like to work. Real work, not just chores. I can earn my keep. James, Clara started, but Ethan held up a hand. How old are you, son? 10? Almost 11. I'm strong. I can help with the cattle, or can you ride? James's eagerness dimmed. No, sir, but I can learn. Ethan studied the boy for a long moment. All right. You work with Sam in the mornings. He'll teach you horses and basic ranch work. Afternoons, you help your mother or do schoolwork. Fair? We don't have school, James said. Your mother will teach you. Reading, writing, arithmetic. That's part of the deal. Work's important, but education's more important. Agreed? James glanced at Clara, who nodded. The boy's face split into a grin. Agreed, thank you, sir. After James ran off to find Sam, Clara turned to Ethan. You didn't have to do that. He's a good kid, wants to contribute. No harm in letting him learn something useful. Ethan picked up his hat from the table. I've got to ride out and check the north pasture. I'll be back by dinner. If you need anything, Frank's around. He left before Clara could thank him again, which was probably deliberate. The man seemed allergic to gratitude. Clara spent the rest of the morning exploring the kitchen, taking inventory of what was available. The pantry was well stocked. Flour, sugar, cornmeal, dried beans, rice, salt, spices she hadn't seen in years. The cold box outside held butter, milk, eggs, a side of bacon, and a quarter of beef. It was more food than Clara's family had seen in 3 years of homesteading. She tried not to think about what that meant. Tried not to feel bitter about the fact that Thomas had left them starving while men like Ethan Caldwell had plenty. It wasn't productive, that bitterness. It changed nothing. By midday, the children had settled into exploration. William and Michael had discovered a litter of barn cats and were attempting to befriend them. Sarah had found the ranch's small vegetable garden and was inspecting it with the critical eye of someone who knew what a garden should look like. Even Rebecca seemed content, dozing in a patch of sunlight on the bunkhouse floor while Clara worked nearby, mending a tear in Michael's shirt. Frank stopped by around noon with a string of fresh-caught trout. Thought you might want these for dinner, he said, handing them over. There's a good fishing spot about a mile upstream. Your boys might enjoy it, if you're comfortable letting them wander a bit. They can handle themselves, Clara said. Thank you for the fish. My pleasure, ma'am. Frank hesitated, then added, just so you know, Ethan's not much for conversation, but he's a man of his word. If he says he'll do something, he does it. You and your children are safe here. Clara met his eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you've got the look of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I wanted you to know there's no other shoe. This is just a man offering work to a woman who needs it. Nothing more complicated than that. After Frank left, Claire stood in the kitchen holding the fish, feeling that strange tightness in her chest again. She'd spent so long expecting the worst that simple decency felt suspicious. She cleaned the fish methodically, her hands remembering the motions from childhood summers when her father would bring home his catch. By the time Ethan and the hands returned that evening, she had dinner ready, fried trout, boiled potatoes, greens from the garden, and more biscuits. The men ate with the same enthusiasm they'd shown at breakfast. Clara fed her own children first, making sure they had enough before she served herself, a habit so ingrained she barely noticed it anymore. "Mrs. Whitmore," Ethan said after dinner, pushing back from the table. "This is fine cooking, best I've had in years." "It's just food," Clara said, uncomfortable again. "It's more than that. It's care. There's a difference between fuel and a meal, and you're giving us meals." He stood, reaching into his pocket. "Here, first week's wages, prorated." He held out $4. Clara stared at the money. "That's too much. I've only been here 2 days." "You've made 6 meals, all of them excellent. You've kept the kitchen cleaner than it's been since I built this house. And you've started organizing things that have needed organizing for months. Take it." Clara took the money with trembling fingers. $4. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was $4 she'd earned herself. $4 that belonged to her and her children. $4 that no one could take away. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara sat at the bunkhouse table counting and recounting the money. $4 this week, $15 next month if she kept this up. In 6 months, she'd have $90, enough for train tickets east maybe, or a deposit on a small place somewhere cheaper than Montana. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to think about the future as something other than immediate survival. The days fell into a pattern after that. Clara rose before dawn, started coffee, prepared breakfast. The men ate, worked, returned for dinner. She cooked, cleaned, mended. In the afternoons, while Rebecca napped, she taught the older children from the few books Ethan had in the house. Basic readers, a worn arithmetic primer, a Bible she skipped over carefully because she'd lost her faith somewhere between Thomas's letter and the last empty jar of preserves. James worked with Sam every morning, learning to handle horses and repair tack. He came back to the bunkhouse each day, exhausted and glowing with the kind of pride Clara hadn't seen in him since before Thomas left. Sarah helped in the kitchen, quick and capable, absorbing everything Clara taught her about cooking for quantity and making supplies stretch. The girl had a gift for it, an instinct for flavors and timing that reminded Clara painfully of her own mother. Even William and Michael found their place, gathering eggs and feeding chickens and generally staying out of trouble more often than not. The work was hard, harder than homesteading in some ways because the standards were higher and there were more people depending on her, but it was also satisfying in a way that planting crops that wouldn't grow had never been. At the end of each day, Claire could see what she'd accomplished. Clean kitchen, full bellies, mended clothes. Tangible proof that she was useful, that she was earning her place. Ethan remained mostly absent during the day, out working the ranch with Frank and the hands. But he was always there for meals, quiet and attentive, listening to the children's chatter without seeming annoyed by it. One evening, about a week after they'd arrived, William asked him about the scar on his jaw. "William," Clara said sharply, "that's rude." "It's all right," Ethan said. He touched the scar absently. "Got kicked by a horse when I was about your age. Didn't duck fast enough." "Did it hurt?" "Like you wouldn't believe." "Were you scared?" Ethan considered this seriously. "I was more embarrassed than scared. The horse's name was Buttercup, and I had to tell everyone a horse named Buttercup knocked me flat." William giggled. Even James smiled. Clara felt something in her chest loosen at the sound of her children's laughter. But not everything was easy. Clara still woke some nights in a panic, disoriented and certain that Thomas had come back, that he'd take the children, that everything would fall apart again. She'd lie there in the darkness, listening to Rebecca breathe, reminding herself where she was and that they were safe. And there was the matter of the other ranchers' wives. 2 weeks after Clara arrived, a woman named Judith Brennan stopped by the ranch. She was the wife of Ethan's nearest neighbor, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper opinions. Clara was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, when Judith let herself in without knocking. "So you're the woman Ethan's taken in," Judith said by way of greeting. "I wanted to see for myself." Clara wiped flour from her hands. "Mrs. Brennan? Can I offer you coffee?" "No, thank you. I won't stay long." Judith looked around the kitchen with open assessment. "I heard your husband abandoned you. Left you with 6 children and nothing else. News travels fast, Clara said evenly. It does in small communities. People talk. Judith fixed Clara with a stern look. I'll be direct, Mrs. Whitmore. There are people saying this arrangement isn't proper. A single woman living on a bachelor's ranch. It looks questionable. Heat flooded Clara's face. I'm working for wages. I sleep in the bunkhouse with my children. There's nothing questionable about honest work. I'm sure that's true. But appearances matter, and Ethan Caldwell's reputation matters. Judith's expression softened slightly. I'm not here to judge you, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm here to warn you. There's talk, and talk can become gossip, and gossip can become something uglier. Be careful. After Judith left, Clara stood in the kitchen feeling sick. She hadn't considered how this might look to others, hadn't thought beyond immediate survival to the social implications of a woman living on a man's ranch. That evening, she raised it with Ethan. Mrs. Brennan came by today, Clara said carefully. They were alone in the kitchen, the children in the bunkhouse, the hands already retired to the barn. She said people are talking about me being here, about it not being proper. Ethan's expression darkened. Judith Brennan should mind her own business. Maybe she's right, though. Maybe this doesn't look good. Do you care what it looks like? Clara blinked. I care about making trouble for you. You've been kind to us. I don't want to repay that by damaging your reputation. My reputation will survive, and anyone who wants to gossip about a woman working to feed her children can go to hell. Ethan stood, pacing to the window. You're doing honest work for honest wages. There's nothing improper about that, and I won't let anyone suggest otherwise. But no. He turned to face her. Mrs. Whitmore, if you want to leave because you're not happy here, that's your choice. But if you're thinking about leaving because of what people might say, then don't. Don't give them that power. Clara studied his face, this man who'd taken in strangers without asking for anything in return, who defended her to neighbors she'd never met, who treated her children like they mattered. I don't want to leave, she said quietly. We're happy here. Happier than we've been in a long time. Then stay. Let people talk. They'll find something else to gossip about eventually. But the conversation lingered in Clara's mind, a reminder that safety was provisional, that circumstance could shift at any moment. The first snow came in early November, 3 weeks after Clara's arrival. She woke to find the world transformed, everything white and hushed and beautiful in a way that used to terrify her. Last year, first snow had meant the beginning of a long, hungry siege. This year, it meant something different. The pantry was full. The woodpile was stacked high. The stove burned warm. Her children had full bellies and warm beds, and the kind of security she'd thought was forever beyond their reach. Clara stood at the bunkhouse window watching snowfall and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Hope. Mama? Sarah appeared beside her, Rebecca on her hip as always. Are we going to be okay? Clara looked at her daughter, this serious, capable 8-year-old who'd grown up too fast and taken on too much. Yes, she said, I think we are. Because of Mr. Caldwell? Because we're working, because we're earning our place. Clara touched Sarah's hair gently. But yes, because Mr. Caldwell gave us a chance when we needed one. That afternoon, Ethan taught James and Michael how to build a proper snowman. Clara watched from the kitchen window, kneading dough for dinner rolls, and felt her throat tighten at the sight of her sons laughing, playing, being children instead of tiny adults struggling to survive. When Ethan came in later, stamping snow from his boots, Clara had hot coffee waiting. Thank you, she said as she handed him a cup. For coffee? For everything, for taking us in, for treating my children with kindness, for... She trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of what he'd given them. Ethan wrapped his cold hands around the cup, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Whitmore, you've thanked me at least a dozen times since you got here. And every time I'm going to tell you the same thing. You don't owe me gratitude. You're working for wages. That's the arrangement. Nothing more complicated than that. It feels more complicated. Then stop making it complicated. But his voice was gentle, without rebuke. You're a good cook and a hard worker. Your children are respectful and willing to learn. This arrangement benefits both of us. That's all it needs to be. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it wasn't that simple, that accepting help felt like weakness after years of Thomas telling her she was too proud for her own good. But she was too tired for that conversation, and Ethan was already moving toward the door. "Dinner in an hour?" he asked. "Dinner in an hour," Clara confirmed. November bled into early December. The snow kept falling, piling up in drifts against the barn, blanketing the valley in white. The ranch work shifted, less range riding, more barn maintenance and equipment repair. The hands spent their days in the workshop, fixing tack and sharpening tools, while Ethan managed the books and planned for spring. Clara's routine remained steady: cook, clean, teach, mend. The work was endless but manageable, and she was good at it. Frank told her at least once a week that she was the best cook he'd had in 50 years. Cooper wrote a letter to his brother back east specifically to tell him about her biscuits. Even Sam, usually quiet, occasionally mentioned that dinner was particularly good. The children thrived. James was learning to ride, sitting tall in the saddle like he'd been born to it. Michael had attached himself to Frank, following the old cowboy around and absorbing ranch wisdom. Sarah was reading at a level far beyond her age, devouring every book in Ethan's small library. Even William seemed calmer, less prone to the whining that had characterized his last months at the homestead. And Rebecca was growing, filling out, her cheeks rounding with proper nutrition and her eyes bright and alert. It was, Clara thought one evening as she watched her family eat dinner together, almost perfect. That should have been her warning. The writer came on a Tuesday in mid-December, just as the afternoon light was starting to fade. Clara was in the kitchen, preparing chicken and dumplings for dinner, when she heard horses in the yard. She glanced out the window and went still. The man was tall, familiar even at a distance. He moved with the kind of swagger Clara knew all too well, and when he turned toward the house, she saw his face and her blood turned to ice. Thomas. Her husband had come back. Clara's hands froze on the wooden spoon, her knuckles white against the worn handle. Through the kitchen window, she watched Thomas dismount with the same easy confidence he'd always carried, as if the last 2 months had never happened, as if he hadn't left his family to starve. He looked better than when he'd abandoned them. His clothes were cleaner, his face less haggard. Someone had been feeding him well. The spoon clattered into the pot. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a drum of panic and rage and something she refused to name as fear. She'd imagined this moment 100 times during sleepless nights, what she'd say, what she'd do, how she'd make him understand the depth of his betrayal. But now that he was here, real and solid and walking toward the house like he had every right, her mind went blank. The kitchen door opened without a knock. Thomas stepped inside, bringing cold air and the smell of whiskey and trail dust. His eyes found Clara immediately, and something flickered in his expression, relief, maybe, or satisfaction. "Clara," he said, as if greeting her after a day's work instead of 2 months of abandonment, "I knew I'd find you here. Heard in Ashford that Caldwell took you in." Clara's voice came out harder than she'd ever heard it. "Get out!" Thomas blinked, seemingly surprised by her tone. "Now, Clara, that's no way to greet your husband. I came back for you, for the family." "You came back." Clara forced herself to breathe, to stay standing when every instinct screamed at her to either run or attack. "You left us with nothing, no food, no money, no way to survive, and now you just walk back in like—" "I left because I couldn't watch you all starve," Thomas interrupted. "I went to find work, to make money so I could come back and provide for you properly." The lie was so brazen, so complete, that for a moment Clara could only stare at him. Then something inside her snapped. "You're a liar." Her voice was quiet, deadly. "You didn't leave to find work. You left because you gave up. You took everything we had and you ran, and you left me and 6 children to die." "I came back, didn't I?" Thomas took a step toward her, his expression shifting to something she recognized, the wounded righteousness he always wore when caught in wrongdoing. "I'm here now. I'm ready to try again. We can go back to the homestead, start fresh." "There is no homestead. I couldn't pay the filing fee. We lost it." Thomas's face darkened. "You lost our land?" The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking audacity, nearly choked her. "I lost nothing. You lost it when you abandoned us, when you took every resource we had and disappeared." "I'm your husband, Clara. Those children are mine. We're a family, and we're going home together. We're not going anywhere with you. The words came from the doorway. Clara turned to see Ethan standing there, his expression calm but his eyes hard as granite. Behind him, Frank and the two hands had materialized, forming a wall of silent support. Thomas sized up Ethan with obvious calculation. You must be Caldwell. I appreciate you looking after my wife and children while I was away, but I'm back now. We'll be leaving. No, Ethan said simply. You won't. Those are my children. Those children, Ethan cut him off, his voice never rising but carrying absolute authority, have been here for 2 months. They're fed, clothed, warm, and safe. Their mother works for me, earns wages, and has made a home here. You have no claim on any of them. Thomas's face flushed red. I have every claim. I'm her husband. The law says a man who abandons his family has forfeited his rights to them. Ethan moved into the kitchen, positioning himself between Thomas and Clara without making it obvious. You want to test that in front of a judge? You're welcome to try. But I know Judge Morrison, and I know how he feels about men who leave women and children to starve. So do yourself a favor and ride back the way you came. For a long moment, the kitchen was silent, except for the bubble of dumplings on the stove. Thomas looked at Clara, at Ethan, at the hands blocking the doorway. She could see him calculating odds, considering options. Clara, he said, his tone shifting to something softer, more pleading. Please. I made a mistake. I know that. But I'm your husband. We took vows. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Something in Clara's chest cracked open, spilling out 2 months of grief and rage and exhaustion. You're right, she said quietly. We took vows. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. And the first time things got hard, really hard, you broke every single one of them. You chose yourself over your children, over me. Those vows stopped meaning anything the morning I woke up and found you gone. I came back, Thomas repeated, desperate now. That has to count for something. It counts for nothing. Clara moved toward him, no longer afraid, no longer uncertain. You want to know what counts? The fact that Ethan Caldwell, a stranger, showed my children more kindness in 1 day than you showed them in 3 years. The fact that my son is learning to be a man from people who actually know what that means. The fact that my daughters feel safe for the first time since we came to Montana. That's what counts. You're choosing him over me? Thomas's voice rose, ugly now. Choosing some rancher who took you in like a stray dog? I'm choosing myself, Clara said. I'm choosing my children. You're not even part of the equation anymore. Thomas lunged forward, grabbing Clara's arm. You're my wife! He didn't finish the sentence. Ethan moved with startling speed, breaking Thomas's grip and putting himself bodily between them. Touch her again, Ethan said softly, and we'll have a very different conversation, the kind that ends with you leaving on a stretcher. Thomas staggered back, rubbing his wrist. You can't keep me from my own family. Watch me. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. You've got 2 choices. You can leave now, peacefully, and everyone forgets this happened, or you can push this further, and I'll have the sheriff here by morning with a warrant for abandonment and neglect. Your choice. The kitchen door banged open and James burst in, Michael right behind him. Both boys stopped short, staring at their father. Papa? James's voice was small, uncertain. Thomas's expression brightened. James! Son, tell your mother. Tell her we need to go home together, as a family. James looked at his father, then at Ethan, then at Clara. His young face was pale but resolute. We are home, he said quietly. And you're not part of it anymore. The words landed like stones. Thomas recoiled as if he'd been struck. James, you don't mean that. Yes, I do. James moved to stand beside Clara, Michael following suit. You left us, Papa. You took everything and you left, and Mama almost died trying to keep us alive. Mr. Caldwell saved us. He gave us food and work and treated us like we mattered. You didn't, so no, we're not going with you. Sarah appeared in the doorway, Rebecca in her arms, William clinging to her skirt. The older girl's eyes were hard as she looked at her father. James is right, she said. We don't want you here. Thomas looked at his children, all of them except the baby, staring at him with varying degrees of anger and rejection. and something in his face crumpled. For a moment, Clara almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Fine," Thomas said hoarsely. "Fine. Keep them. Keep the ranch. Keep your precious new life." He turned on Ethan. "But when this falls apart, when he gets tired of feeding your brats and throws you out, don't come crawling back to me." "I won't," Clara said. "I promise you that." Thomas stalked toward the door, then paused. "I'll be at the saloon in Ashford for the next 2 days. If you come to your senses, that's where you'll find me." Then he was gone, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The kitchen fell silent. Clara stood frozen, her children gathered around her, her hands still trembling from adrenaline and suppressed rage. She felt Ethan's presence beside her, steady and calm, and suddenly her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the nearest chair. Sarah rushed to her side, still holding Rebecca, her young face creased with worry. "Mama? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." Clara's voice shook. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. She was shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. 2 months of suppressed terror and anger finally breaking through the walls she'd built to contain them. Ethan crouched beside her chair. "Frank, take the children to the bunkhouse. Get them settled." "Come on, kids," Frank said gently. "Let's give your mama some space." James hesitated. "Mama..." "Go with Frank," Clara managed. "I'll be there soon." After they left, the kitchen felt too large and too small at the same time. Clara tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She pressed her hands to her face, breathing hard, fighting for control. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I just need a minute." "Take all the time you need." Ethan poured water from the pitcher, handed her the cup. "Drink this." Clara drank, the cold water steadying her somewhat. When she could speak again, she said, "Thank you for stepping in, for protecting us." "You were doing fine on your own." "I wasn't. I was about to fall apart." You didn't, though. You stood up to him, told him the truth." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "That took courage." Clara laughed bitterly. "It didn't feel like courage. It felt like desperation." "Sometimes those are the same thing." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think he'll come back?" "I don't know. Maybe." Clara set down the cup, her hands still trembling. "He said 2 days. He's giving me 2 days to come to my senses." "And will you?" "No." The word came out fierce, certain. "I meant what I said. I'm done with him. I'm done being afraid and grateful for scraps and pretending that his failures are somehow my fault. We're better off without him." "Then we make sure he understands that." Ethan stood. "Tomorrow, we ride to Ashford. We'll talk to Judge Morrison, get the legal side sorted out. Make it official that you and the children are under my protection and employment. That way, if Thomas tries anything, the law's on our side." Clara looked up at him, this quiet man who kept saving her family without asking for anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's right. Because those children deserve better than a father who abandons them. Because you deserve better than a husband who made you feel worthless." Ethan met her eyes. "And because if I let him take you and those kids back to some homestead to starve, I couldn't live with myself." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara woke before the sun, her body tense with anticipation and dread. Today they would face Thomas again, this time with the full weight of the law behind them. She dressed carefully, putting on her best dress, a simple gray wool that she'd mended until the patches had patches. It wasn't much, but it was clean and respectable. She braided her hair tightly, wanting to look composed, in control. Ethan was already in the kitchen when she arrived, along with Frank. Both men looked serious, prepared. "Ready?" Ethan asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The ride to Ashford took 2 hours. Frank stayed behind to watch the children and keep the ranch running. Clara sat in the wagon beside Ethan, watching the winter landscape roll past, trying to prepare herself for whatever came next. "What if the judge sides with Thomas?" she asked quietly. "He won't." "But what if he does? What if the law says I have to go back to him?" Ethan glanced at her. "Then we appeal. We fight. We find another way. But it won't come to that, Mrs. Whitmore. Judge Morrison is a fair man, and the facts are on our side." Ashford came into view around mid-morning, a collection of rough buildings huddled along the main street, smoke rising from chimneys, horses tied at various hitching posts. It was bigger than Clara remembered, more permanent somehow, as if the town had grown roots while she'd been focused on survival. They drove straight to the courthouse, a two-story building at the end of the street. Judge Morrison's office was on the second floor, accessed by an external staircase that creaked under their feet. The judge was a man in his 60s with white hair and keen blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked up from his desk when they entered, recognition lighting his face. "Ethan Caldwell, wasn't expecting you today." His gaze shifted to Clara, curious but not unkind. "And you are?" "Clara Whitmore," Ethan said. "We need your help, Morrison." Over the next 30 minutes, they laid out the situation. Ethan did most of the talking, presenting facts with the kind of calm precision that made everything sound reasonable and obvious. Thomas's abandonment, the letter he'd left. Clara's arrival at the ranch with 6 children and no resources. The arrangement they'd made for work and wages. Judge Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When Ethan finished, the judge turned to Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything Mr.?" Caldwell said. "Accurate?" "Yes, sir." "And your husband, Thomas Whitmore, he's currently in Ashford." "At the saloon. He arrived yesterday, demanding I return to him." "Do you want to return to him?" The question was direct, uncompromising. Clara met the judge's eyes. "No, sir, I do not. He abandoned us, left us to starve. I won't put my children through that again." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Whitmore. The law isn't always kind to women in your situation. Technically, your husband has rights to you and your children, but—" He held up a hand when Clara's face fell. "There are circumstances under which those rights can be challenged. Abandonment is one of them. Neglect is another. And what you're describing sounds like both. So what do we do?" Ethan asked. "First, I'd like to speak with Thomas Whitmore. Get his side of the story." Morrison stood, reaching for his coat. "Then we'll go from there. Mrs. Whitmore, are you comfortable confronting your husband in a public setting?" Clara thought about the kitchen yesterday, about finding her voice after 2 months of silence. "Yes, sir, I am." They found Thomas at the saloon, exactly where he'd said he'd be. The establishment was dingy even in daylight, with sawdust floors and the lingering smell of stale beer. Thomas sat at a corner table, a half-empty bottle in front of him. His eyes widened when he saw them enter, Clara, Ethan, and Judge Morrison in his official capacity. "Thomas Whitmore?" Morrison said. "I'm Judge Morrison. I'd like to speak with you about your family situation." Thomas stood unsteadily. "Finally. Someone official who can tell my wife she belongs at home with her husband." "That's not quite how this works," Morrison said dryly. "Let's sit down." What followed was an interrogation disguised as a conversation. Morrison asked questions with the precision of a man who'd spent decades separating truth from lies. Where had Thomas been for the past 2 months? What money had he earned? Why had he taken the family's resources when he left? Thomas's answers grew increasingly defensive and contradictory. He'd been looking for work. He'd been planning to send money. He'd needed the wagon and horses to find employment. Each excuse rang more hollow than the last. "So let me understand," Morrison said after 20 minutes. "You left your wife and 6 children with no food, no money, no transportation, and no means of survival. You took everything of value, and you did this because you were looking for work?" "I was trying to provide for them," Thomas insisted. "By leaving them to starve while you drank your way through whatever money you made?" Morrison gestured to the bottle on the table. "Mr. Whitmore, I've heard a lot of excuses in my time, but yours ranks among the poorest." Thomas's face flushed. "What about her?" He pointed at Clara. "She's living on another man's ranch, cooking his meals, sleeping under his roof. That doesn't seem questionable to you?" "What seems questionable to me," Morrison said coldly, "is a man who abandons his family and then has the audacity to question his wife's choices when she's forced to survive without him. Mrs. Whitmore's employed. She earns wages. She lives in the bunkhouse with her children. There's nothing improper about honest work. She's my wife. A title you forfeited when you left her." Morrison stood. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Whitmore. You're going to sign a legal document relinquishing your parental rights and your claim to Mrs. Whitmore. In exchange, she won't press charges for abandonment and neglect. Charges that could see you in jail. Thomas gaped. You can't force me to do that. You're right. I can't force you. But I can make your life extremely difficult if you refuse. I can have the sheriff investigate where you've been, what you've been doing, who you've been associating with. I can make sure every rancher and business owner in 3 counties knows you abandoned your family. And I can ensure that if you ever try to claim those children again, you'll be fighting an uphill battle in court that you will lose. Morrison leaned forward. Or you can sign the papers, walk away, and save yourself the trouble. Your choice. The saloon was silent except for the ticking of the clock behind the bar. Thomas looked at Clara, at Ethan, at the judge. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. Finally, he slumped in his chair. Fine. Give me the damn papers. Morrison produced documents from his coat. He'd come prepared, Clara realized, had known how this would go. Thomas signed with an angry scrawl, not even reading the words. When he was done, Morrison blotted the ink, folded the papers carefully, and handed one copy to Clara. There, he said. It's done, Mr. Whitmore, you are no longer the legal guardian of those children, and you have no claim to Mrs. Whitmore. If you approach her or her children again, you'll be arrested for harassment. Am I clear? Thomas nodded stiffly. Then we're finished here. Morrison turned to Clara. Mrs. Whitmore, you and your children are free, legally and completely. The weight of those words didn't hit Clara until they were back outside, walking toward the wagon. Free, legally and completely. No longer bound to a man who'd proven himself unworthy of her trust. No longer trapped in a marriage that had become a cage. She stopped in the middle of the street, the papers clutched in her hand, and felt tears streaming down her face. Ethan touched her elbow gently. Mrs. Whitmore? I'm all right, she managed. I'm free. We're actually free. You are. Ethan smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious face. Come on, let's go home. Home. The word resonated in Clara's chest. Not the homestead, that place of failure and desperation. Not Thomas's house, where she'd tried so hard to make something work that was doomed from the start. But the ranch, where her children laughed and learned and ate their fill, where she worked and earned and built something new. They drove back in companionable silence, Clara turning the papers over in her hands, still not quite believing they were real. As they approached the ranch, she could see Frank on the porch. The children gathered around him. When the wagon pulled into the yard, they all rushed forward. Mama, Sarah called, is everything all right? Clara climbed down from the wagon and gathered her children close, all of them, even James, who thought he was too old for hugging. Everything's perfect, she said. We're free. We're staying. This is our home now. That evening, after the children were asleep, Clara found Ethan on the porch of the main house. He was sitting in one of the rough chairs, looking out at the darkened valley. Mind if I join you? She asked. He gestured to the other chair. Clara sat, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cold. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said, I don't know how to thank you. For today. For everything. You don't need to. Yes, I do. Clara turned to look at him. You saved us, Ethan. Not just from starvation or homelessness, but from him. From being trapped in something that would have killed us one way or another. I need you to know that I understand what you've done for us. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When I lost my sister, he said finally, I felt like I'd failed. Like I should have been able to protect her, save her somehow. I couldn't. But today, helping you and those kids, it felt like maybe I could still do something right. So really, Mrs. Whitmore, you helped me as much as I helped you. Clara reached over and took his hand. He didn't pull away. They sat there in the darkness, two people who'd lost too much and found something unexpected in the wreckage. Clara, she said quietly, you can call me Clara. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. Clara, he repeated. And you should call me Ethan. The weeks after Thomas's departure settled into something deeper than routine. They became rhythm, the kind that sinks into bones and becomes indistinguishable from breathing. Clara had never known this kind of peace, hadn't realized life could be both hard work and deeply satisfying at the same time. The children bloomed. James was riding like he'd been born to it, helping Sam and Cooper with the horses and learning the 1,000 small skills that made a good ranch hand. Michael had taken to carpentry, working with Frank to repair equipment and build new shelves for the storehouse. Sarah was teaching the younger children their letters with a patience that amazed Clara, and even William had found his place, discovering he had a gift for handling the chickens and collecting eggs without breaking a single one. And Rebecca was thriving, growing plump and happy on regular milk and the kind of attention that comes when people aren't scrambling just to survive. Clara herself had never felt more capable. She was cooking for 6 people daily, managing a household that actually had resources to manage, earning money that belonged to her alone. The first time she received a full month's wages, $15 in actual currency, she'd sat in the bunkhouse and cried. But it was Ethan who surprised her most. He'd always been kind, always respectful, but in the weeks following Thomas's departure, something shifted. He started staying longer after meals, talking with the children about their day. He taught William how to whittle, showed Michael the proper way to plane wood, listened to Sarah read with genuine interest. He brought Clara books from somewhere, good ones, novels she'd never had time to read when every moment was consumed by survival. And sometimes in the evenings, they'd sit on the porch together and just talk. About the ranch, about Montana, about life. Ethan told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the early years when he'd lived in a tent and eaten beans for every meal. Clara talked about growing up back east, about the dreams she'd had before Thomas, before Montana, before life had taught her that dreams were luxuries poor people couldn't afford. One evening in late December, Clara was washing dishes when Ethan came into the kitchen carrying firewood. "For the bunkhouse stove," he said. "Supposed to drop below 0 tonight." "Thank you." Clara dried her hands. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Well, why haven't you ever married? You're a good man. You've got a successful ranch. I'd think women would be interested." Ethan set down the firewood carefully. "There was someone once, long time ago. She didn't want ranch life, wanted to go back east to the cities. I couldn't leave this place, and she couldn't stay. So she left. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important. You can't build a life with someone who doesn't want the same things you do. Better to know that early than waste years trying to force it." He paused. "What about you? Did you love Thomas? Before everything fell apart?" Clara considered the question honestly. "I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of him more than the reality. He was charming when we met, full of plans and promises. I was young and stupid enough to believe them. By the time I realized who he really was, we had 3 children and I was pregnant with the 4th. So I stayed, tried to make it work, convinced myself that if I just tried harder, was better, more patient, he'd change." She laughed bitterly. "Took him abandoning us for me to finally understand. He was never going to change, and I'd wasted years waiting for something that was never going to happen." "You're free now," Ethan said quietly. "Free to choose what comes next." Clara met his eyes, saw something in them that made her breath catch. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "What if I don't know what I want to come next?" "Then you have time to figure it out." But he didn't look away, and Clara didn't break the gaze. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Rebecca started crying in the bunkhouse, and the spell broke. Clara moved toward the door, but Ethan caught her hand gently. "Clara," he said, "I want you to know, whatever you decide, whatever you need, you and the children have a place here. Always. That's not going to change." Her throat tight, Clara could only nod before hurrying to tend to her daughter. But his words stayed with her through the night and into the days that followed. A promise and a question all at once. Christmas came, and with it the first real celebration Clara's children had experienced in years. Ethan produced a small pine tree from somewhere, and the whole household decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper chains the children made. Frank roasted a turkey he'd won in a card game, and Clara made every pie she could think of: apple, pumpkin, mincemeat. The children received small gifts: new gloves, a pocket knife for James, a doll for Sarah that made the girls' eyes shine. Clara received a length of beautiful blue fabric from Ethan, enough to make a new dress. You didn't have to, she'd whispered, touching the soft material. I wanted to, he'd replied simply. It was, Clara thought, as she watched her children's happy faces, the best Christmas she could remember, not because of the gifts or the food, but because they were together, safe, and for the first time in years, genuinely happy. On New Year's Day, Ethan found Clara in the kitchen kneading bread dough. The children were outside building snow forts, their laughter carrying through the cold air. Clara, Ethan said, can we talk? Something in his tone made her pause. Of course. He stood across the table from her, his hat in his hands, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. I've been thinking about us, about this arrangement. Clara's heart began to pound. All right. You've been here 4 months now. You and the children, you've become part of this place, part of my life. I can't imagine the ranch without you anymore. He took a breath. I know it's only been a few months since you got free of Thomas. I know you might not be ready, but I need to say this before I lose my nerve. Ethan, let me finish, please. He met her eyes. Clara Whitmore, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because it's practical, though it would be. Not because people are talking, though they are. But because I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you've rebuilt your life from nothing. I love how you are with your children, how hard you work, how you never give up. And I love those kids like they were my own. I want to be their father, legally and in every way that matters. I want to build a life with you, a real life based on respect and partnership and, he faltered, and love. If you'll have me. Clara stared at him, flour dusting her hands, her heart so full it hurt. She thought about the last 4 months, about how Ethan had never once made her feel small or helpless or worthless, how he defended her, protected her children, given them all a chance when no one else would, how he'd been patient and kind and steady, qualities she'd once thought didn't exist in men. She thought about the alternative, staying as they were, employer and employee, nothing more, safe maybe, but not complete. And she thought about what she wanted, not for her children or for security or for any reason except her own heart. Yes, she said, and watched his face transform. Yes, I'll marry you. Ethan crossed around the table in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, flower and all. And when he kissed her, Clara felt something she'd thought was dead inside her flicker back to life. Hope for the future, belief in happiness, trust in another person's goodness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Clara said, "We should tell the children." They found them all outside, engaged in an epic snowball battle. When Clara called them over, they came running, cheeks red from cold and exertion. "We have something to tell you," Clara said, taking Ethan's hand. "Ethan has asked me to marry him, and I said yes, which means he'll be your stepfather, if that's all right with you." For a moment, the children were silent. Then James whooped and threw his hat in the air. Sarah started crying happy tears. Michael and William tackled Ethan's legs in a hug that nearly knocked him over. Even Rebecca, secure in Sarah's arms, gurgled happily. "Does this mean we get to stay forever?" William asked. "Forever?" Ethan confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're my family now. All of you." Clara watched her children embrace this man who'd saved them, who'd chosen them, who'd proven that family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was choice and commitment and love that grew slowly, carefully, in the space between crisis and healing. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd made the right decision. Not just for her children's sake, though that was part of it, but for herself, for the woman she was becoming, stronger and braver than the girl who'd married Thomas all those years ago. The wedding would come soon, simple and honest, witnessed by people who'd seen them survive the worst together. But the real marriage, the one built on trust and respect and genuine partnership, had already begun. The wedding was set for February, giving Clara time to make a proper dress from the blue fabric Ethan had given her for Christmas and allowing the worst of winter to pass before they made the trip to Ashford for the ceremony. But the waiting period did nothing to diminish the certainty Clara felt. If anything, each day that passed only reinforced her conviction that marrying Ethan was the rightest thing she'd ever chosen to do. The morning after their engagement, Clara woke to find the world transformed once again. But this time, the transformation was internal. She lay in her narrow bunk listening to her children breathe, and for the first time in years, she felt something that had been absent so long, she'd forgotten what it was called: joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She rose and dressed, moving quietly through the pre-dawn darkness. But when she entered the kitchen, she found Ethan already there, coffee made, stove warming the room. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, handing her a cup. "Didn't want to waste the day sleeping." Clara took the coffee gratefully, warming her hands on the tin cup. "I kept thinking about everything that needs to be done before February. The dress, arrangements with Judge Morrison, telling people—" "Clara," Ethan interrupted her gently. "We don't need much. A simple ceremony, a few witnesses, that's all that matters. I know, but I want it to be right. I want the children to remember it as something good, something joyful. They've had so little joy in their lives." Ethan studied her face in the lamplight. "Then we'll make it joyful. Whatever you want, we'll figure it out." What Clara wanted, she discovered over the next few weeks, was simpler than she'd thought. She wanted her children clean and happy and well-fed. She wanted to stand beside Ethan without shame or fear. She wanted to speak vows that meant something, to someone who would keep them. The blue fabric became a dress under Sarah's surprisingly skilled needle. The girl had inherited Clara's eye for detail and worked with patient precision, creating something beautiful from simple materials. Clara watched her daughter sew and felt her throat tighten with pride and gratitude. "You're doing a wonderful job, sweetheart," she said one evening. Sarah looked up, her young face serious. "I want you to look pretty, Mama, like a real bride." "I'll be a real bride no matter what I wear." "I know, but you deserve to feel pretty too." Sarah returned to her stitching. "Mr. Caldwell, Ethan, he looks at you like you're already the prettiest woman in Montana. I want the dress to match how he sees you." Clara pulled her daughter into a hug. This child who'd grown up too fast but somehow retained the ability to see beauty in difficult things. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you," Sarah said simply. The news of the engagement spread through the small ranching community faster than Clara had anticipated. Within a week, Judith Brennan appeared at the ranch again, this time with a different expression on her severe face. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway, "I heard about your engagement to Ethan Caldwell." Clara braced herself for judgment, for disapproval, for all the things she'd come to expect from people like Judith. "Yes, ma'am. We're to be married in February." To her surprise, Judith's face softened into something almost like a smile. "I came to apologize. When I was here before, I suggested your arrangement wasn't proper. I was wrong. I didn't understand the full situation, and I let gossip cloud my judgment. Ethan Caldwell is a good man, and from what I've seen, you're a good woman. You'll make a fine match." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I also came to offer help." Judith set a basket on the table. "Wedding cake, flowers, whatever you need. I've been married 32 years, and I remember what it's like trying to put together a celebration on short notice. Let me help." The gesture broke something open in Clara's chest. She'd been so used to facing the world alone, to expecting judgment and finding only closed doors, that kindness from unexpected sources still surprised her. "I'd be grateful for the help," Clara managed. "Truly grateful." Other neighbors followed Judith's lead. The wife of a rancher 10 miles north brought fabric for new shirts for the boys. A widow from Ashford donated her late husband's good suit for James to wear. Frank's sister, who lived in town, offered to make a cake that, according to Frank, would be the best thing any of them had ever tasted. The community that Clara had feared would judge her instead embraced her, and she realized that most people understood survival, understood second chances, understood that life on the frontier was too hard to waste energy on small-minded gossip. But not everyone was pleased. 3 weeks before the wedding, Clara was hanging laundry in the cold January air when a familiar figure rode into the yard. Her hands froze on the wet sheet, water dripping onto the frozen ground. Thomas. He looked worse than the last time she'd seen him, thinner, harder, with eyes that held something ugly and desperate. He dismounted and walked toward her with the unsteady gait of someone who'd been drinking. "Clara," he said, "I heard you're getting married, to Caldwell." Clara forced herself to stay calm. You're not supposed to be here, Thomas. You signed papers. You gave up your rights. I know what I signed. His voice was bitter. But that was before I knew you'd be replacing me so quickly. How long did you wait? A month? 2? I waited 3 years for you to be the husband you promised to be, Clara said quietly. I don't owe you explanations about my life anymore. Those are my children. No. Clara's voice was steel. They stopped being yours the day you abandoned them. They're mine, and soon they'll be Ethan's legally and in every way that counts. You made your choice, Thomas. Live with it. Thomas took a step closer, and Clara saw Ethan emerge from the barn, Frank and Sam right behind him. They didn't run, didn't shout, just moved with purposeful calm toward where Clara stood. You need to leave, Ethan said when he reached them. Now. Thomas laughed, harsh and broken. Or what? You'll have me arrested? For coming to see my own wife? Former wife. Judge Morrison's voice came from behind them. The judge had ridden up so quietly no one had noticed. Or did you forget that the annulment papers were filed last week? Clara's head snapped around. Annulment? Morrison dismounted, official documents in hand. Forgive me for not mentioning it sooner, Mrs. Whitmore. Given the circumstances of abandonment and the fact that Mr. Whitmore signed over all rights, I was able to file for annulment on grounds of desertion. It was finalized 3 days ago. You're no longer married to this man. You're free to marry whomever you choose. The words hit Clara like a physical force, not just free from obligation, but actually legally unmarried, as if the years with Thomas had been erased, nullified, relegated to a mistake that could be corrected. Thomas stared at the papers. You can't do that. It's already done, Morrison said calmly. And if you don't leave this property immediately, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing and harassment. Your choice, Mr. Whitmore, but choose quickly. For a long moment, Thomas stood there, swaying slightly, his face contorted with rage and something that might have been grief. Then he looked at Clara, really looked at her, and whatever he saw made his shoulders slump. You were always too good for me, he said quietly. I knew that. Even when we married, I knew it. That's why I ran. Couldn't stand watching you realize it too. Thomas, Clara started, but he was already turning away. Be happy, he said over his shoulder. Be happier than you ever were with me. That shouldn't be hard. They watched him ride away, and this time Clara knew he wouldn't be back. There was finality in his posture, in the way he didn't look back. Whatever claim he'd thought he had on her, on their children, he'd finally released it. Morrison handed Clara the annulment papers. I'm sorry for the surprise, but I thought it best to handle it quietly. The marriage is dissolved. You're Clara Whitmore only because you haven't legally changed your name yet. When you marry Mr. Caldwell, it'll be a fresh start in every sense. Clara looked at the papers, at the official seals and legal language that said she was no longer bound to the man who'd broken every promise he'd ever made. She felt Ethan's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm, and leaned into him. Thank you, she whispered to Morrison. Thank you. After the judge left, Clara stood in the yard holding the papers, feeling lighter than she had in years. The children emerged from the bunkhouse where they'd been hiding during Thomas's visit, their faces anxious. Is he gone? James asked. For good this time? For good, Claire confirmed. And you don't have to worry about him anymore. Any of you. He's not your father, not legally, not in any way that matters. You're free to choose your own family now. Michael stepped forward, his young face serious. We already chose. We chose you and Ethan and this ranch. We chose to be Caldwells. The simple declaration brought tears to Clara's eyes. Then Caldwells you'll be. All of you if you want. That evening, Ethan brought up the subject Clara had been too nervous to raise herself. I've been thinking, he said as they sat in the kitchen after the children were asleep, about the adoption. I'd like to legally adopt all 6 children, make it official that they're mine. Clara's throat tightened. You don't have to do that. I want to. They deserve a father who chooses them, who claims them proudly, and I want them to know that my commitment to them isn't conditional on my marriage to you. They're my children now. I want the law to reflect that. Even Rebecca? Clara asked softly. She's not even a year old. You'd take on a baby who's not yours? Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. She is mine. They all are. The moment I offered you work, the moment I brought you here, I was choosing them. This is just making it official. Clara stood and moved around the table, and Ethan rose to meet her. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face to his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. How did I get this lucky? She whispered. I'm the lucky one, Ethan replied, his arms tightening around her. I got a whole family when I thought I'd spend my life alone. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The blue dress took shape under Sarah's careful stitching. Frank's sister arrived with a cake so magnificent that William stared at it with round eyes and asked if they were really allowed to eat something that beautiful. James learned to tie a proper necktie under Sam's patient instruction. Michael helped Ethan build a new shelf in the main house specifically for Clara's few precious books, and through it all, Clara felt herself transforming, not into someone new, but into someone she'd been all along, hidden under years of diminishment and survival. She was strong, capable, worthy of love and respect. She'd survived abandonment and starvation and rebuilt her life from nothing. She'd protected her children, found work, and made a home in a place that had seemed hostile and unforgiving. The night before the wedding, Clara sat with her children in the bunkhouse, all of them gathered around the stove. Sarah held Rebecca, James and Michael sat on one bed. William curled up beside Clara. Tomorrow, Clara said, our lives change again. Ethan will become your father, legally and in every way that matters. This ranch will be our permanent home. We'll be a family, officially. But I want you to understand something important. You already are my family. You already are enough. Ethan is a gift, a blessing, but you six are the reason I kept fighting, the reason I survived. I need you to know that. James spoke first, his voice cracking slightly in that way of boys becoming men. We know, Mama. And we need you to know that you saved us too. You didn't give up on us when Papa did. You found a way. You brought us here. We're a team, Sarah added softly. All of us. That's not going to change just because we're adding Ethan to it. Michael nodded vigorously. Ethan says a family is not about blood. It's about who shows up, and he showed up for us, just like you did, Mama. Even William, usually so focused on himself, said, I like having a papa who doesn't leave. Can we keep him? Clara laughed through her tears. Yes, sweetheart, we can keep him. That night, Clara lay awake long after the children had fallen asleep, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the stove. Tomorrow she would marry Ethan Caldwell. Tomorrow she would start a new chapter of her life with a man who'd proven his worth, not through words, but through consistent daily action. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate, starving, certain she and her children would die. She thought about the morning she'd woken to find Thomas gone, the terror and rage and helplessness that had consumed her. And she thought about the series of small miracles that had brought her here. Ethan's unexpected offer, the children's resilience, her own stubborn refusal to give up, the community's unexpected support. Tomorrow wasn't just a wedding. It was proof that life could surprise you, that endings could become beginnings, that the worst moments could lead to the best ones if you just kept moving forward. The February morning dawned clear and cold, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara woke to find Sarah already up, heating water for washing and laying out the blue dress with reverent care. Morning, Mama, Sarah said. Your wedding day. The words sent a thrill through Clara's chest. Her wedding day. Not the rushed, uncertain ceremony with Thomas in a dusty courthouse back east, but a real celebration with people who cared about her, in a place she'd chosen, to a man who'd earned her trust. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Clara bathed, dressed with Sarah's help, braided her hair in a simple but elegant style. The blue dress fit perfectly, falling just right, making her look and feel like someone worth marrying. When she emerged from the bunkhouse, the children waiting outside gasped. Even James, trying to be grown up and stoic, couldn't hide his smile. Mama, you're beautiful, Sarah breathed. You really are, James agreed. Ethan's going to lose his mind. The trip to Ashford took an hour, the whole family plus Frank, Sam, and Cooper traveling together in 2 wagons. The courthouse was decorated with winter greenery, and Judge Morrison stood ready in his official robes, looking both solemn and pleased. Ethan waited inside, wearing a suit Clara had never seen before, dark and well-fitted, making him look both unfamiliar and devastatingly handsome. When he saw her enter, his expression transformed into something so tender and awestruck that Clara felt her knees go weak. The ceremony itself was simple. They stood before Judge Morrison with their children arranged around them, James and Michael on Ethan's side, Sarah holding Rebecca on Clara's, William standing between them because he couldn't decide which side to choose. Morrison spoke about commitment and partnership, about choosing family and building lives together. Then it was time for the vows. Ethan went first, his voice steady and clear. Clara, I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to honor you, respect you, and support you in all things. I promise to be a father to your children, to protect them and guide them and love them as my own. I promise to make this ranch a home where all of you feel safe and valued and cherished. I promise to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me today. Clara's turn. She looked into Ethan's eyes and spoke from her heart. Ethan, I promise to be your partner in building this life we're creating, to work beside you, support you, and face whatever challenges come with courage and determination. I promise to trust you with my children's hearts and futures. I promise to build a home with you based on honesty, respect, and love. And I promise to never forget that you chose us when no one else would, and to spend my life proving that your faith in us was justified. Morrison smiled. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan cupped Clara's face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and futures unfolding. The children cheered, even Rebecca making happy noises, and when they broke apart, Clara was laughing and crying at the same time. Mrs. Caldwell, Ethan said softly. Mr. Caldwell, Clara replied, testing out her new name and finding it fit perfectly. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, neighbors and friends gathering to share food and good wishes. Frank's sister's cake was indeed the best thing any of them had ever tasted. The children ran wild in the snow, drunk on cake and happiness. Clara moved through the gathering, receiving congratulations and well wishes, Ethan's hand never far from hers. Judith Brennan pulled Clara aside at one point, her severe face softened by genuine warmth. I was wrong about you, she said quietly. I judged based on appearances and gossip, but I've watched you these past months, seen how hard you work, how devoted you are to those children. You're exactly what Ethan needs, and he's exactly what you deserve. I hope you'll forgive my earlier harshness. There's nothing to forgive, Clara said honestly. You were looking out for someone you care about. That's not wrong. As evening approached and the guests began to leave, Clara found herself standing on the porch of the main house, her house now, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. Happy? He asked. Happier than I ever thought possible, Clara admitted. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over, thought I'd failed at everything that mattered, and now you're home, Ethan finished. We're home. All of us. Inside, the children were settling in, their voices carrying through the walls. James was reading to the younger ones. Sarah was feeding Rebecca, the sounds of a family at peace with itself and its place in the world. Clara leaned back into Ethan's embrace and watched the Montana sky turn from blue to gold to pink. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the fear, the moments of absolute desperation. She thought about Thomas's abandonment and how she'd thought it was the end of everything. But it hadn't been an end. It had been a beginning. The beginning of learning her own strength. The beginning of understanding that family was choice as much as blood. The beginning of believing that she deserved kindness, respect, and love. Thank you, she whispered to Ethan, for seeing us, for choosing us, for giving us a chance. Thank you, Ethan replied, for taking it, for trusting me with something so precious, for building this life with me. They stood together as the stars began to emerge, husband and wife, partners in a life they were creating together. Behind them, in the warm house, 6 children who'd survived abandonment and starvation and the harsh Montana winter were settling into their beds, safe, fed, loved, and certain that tomorrow would come with all its challenges, but without fear. Clara had been abandoned with 6 children and no future. A cowboy had stepped in and said, "They're mine now." And in choosing to trust him, in choosing to marry him, in choosing to build this life together, Clara had discovered something fundamental about herself. She wasn't a victim waiting to be saved. She was a survivor who'd found a partner. She wasn't helpless. She was strong. She wasn't broken. She was healing. And the family they were building together, imperfect, unconventional, born from crisis and desperation, was real and solid, and hers in a way nothing had ever been before. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and all the ordinary difficulties of ranch life. But it would also bring laughter and partnership and the quiet satisfaction of building something good from the wreckage of what had been. Clara Caldwell, the name felt right, felt true, was finally, truly home. The first morning of Clara's marriage began the way she suspected all her mornings would now begin. With Ethan beside her in the big bed they now shared, his breathing deep and steady in the pre-dawn quiet. She lay still for a moment, adjusting to the unfamiliar intimacy of another person's warmth, another person's presence in the space that had always been hers alone. Through the window, she could see the first hint of light touching the eastern mountains. Somewhere in the house, one of the children stirred. Michael, probably. Always the earliest riser after Clara herself. She heard his footsteps padding toward the kitchen, heard the soft clink of the stove being opened. "He'll burn himself trying to start the fire," Clara murmured, starting to rise. Ethan's hand caught hers gently. "He's done it a dozen times with Frank. He knows what he's doing. Stay." It was a small thing, that permission to rest, to let someone else handle the morning chaos. But for Clara, who'd spent years being the only adult, the only problem solver, the only one who could be relied upon, it felt revolutionary. She settled back against the pillows. "I'm not used to this." "I know." Ethan turned to face her, his hair mussed from sleep, his eyes soft. "But you'll learn. We both will. This partnership thing, it's new for me too." They lay there together, listening to the house wake up around them. Sarah's voice joined Michael's in the kitchen. James's heavier tread moved toward the barn. The boy had taken his ranch responsibilities seriously, never missing a morning feeding. Even William's sleepy complaints drifted through the walls, and Rebecca's fussy cry was quickly soothed by Sarah's gentle humming. "They're good kids," Ethan said. "You raised them well." "I kept them alive," Clara corrected. "But good. That's something they became in spite of everything, not because of me." "Don't do that." Ethan's voice was firm but kind. "Don't diminish what you accomplished. You kept 6 children alive through circumstances that would have broken most people. You taught them resilience and loyalty, and how to keep going when everything looks hopeless. That's not nothing, Clara. That's everything." Before Clara could respond, a knock came at the bedroom door. "Mama? Ethan? Michael made coffee, and he says to tell you it's not burned this time." Clara smiled. "We'll be right there, Sarah." Their first day as a married couple was, in most ways, unremarkable. Breakfast was eaten, chores were done, the rhythm of ranch life continued as it always had, but there were small differences that made Clara's chest tight with gratitude. Ethan kissed her goodbye before riding out to check fence lines. James called him Papa for the first time and didn't look embarrassed about it. Sarah asked Clara what she should call herself now, Sarah Whitmore or Sarah Caldwell, and seemed pleased when Clara said the choice was hers entirely. "Caldwell," Sarah decided after a moment's thought. "I want to be Sarah Caldwell." One by one, over the next few days, the children made the same choice. Even James, who'd carried his father's name longest and might have been expected to cling to it out of stubbornness or residual loyalty, announced that he'd rather be James Caldwell, if that was all right with everyone. "More than all right," Ethan had said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'd be honored." The adoption papers were filed in March, when the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring touched the valley. Judge Morrison handled the proceedings with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown throughout their legal struggles, and when he handed Ethan the final documents declaring him the legal father of 6 children, the judge's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You're a good man, Caldwell," Morrison said. "These children are lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Ethan replied, and Clara knew he meant it. Spring brought changes beyond the legal ones. The ranch emerged from winter's grip, and with the thaw came new responsibilities and opportunities. Ethan began teaching James and Michael the finer points of cattle management, taking them on longer rides into the high pastures where the herd would graze come summer. Sarah discovered a talent for gardening, expanding the small vegetable plot into something ambitious and productive. Even William found his calling, developing an unexpected skill with the horses that surprised everyone, including himself. "He's got gentle hands," Sam reported to Ethan one evening. "The horses trust him. Even that mean roan gelding we got last fall, William can walk right up to him without getting bit." Clara watched her children bloom in ways she'd never imagined possible. They were still the same kids who'd huddled in the cabin waiting to starve, but they were also becoming something new, confident, capable, secure in the knowledge that they were wanted and valued. And Rebecca, now over a year old, was taking her first wobbling steps, chasing chickens in the yard and laughing when they fluttered away from her grasping hands. She would never remember Thomas, would never know a father other than Ethan. Sometimes Clara wondered if that was a blessing or a loss, then decided it was simply the truth of their lives, neither good nor bad, but simply what was. The first real test of their new family came in late April, when a late spring storm rolled through the valley with unexpected fury. Clara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending dark clouds racing across the sky. Ethan came in from the barn, his face tight with concern. "Storm's going to be bad. Frank and the boys are securing everything, but I need James and Michael to help bring in the horses from the east pasture. Can you spare them?" "Of course." Clara was already moving, calling for the boys. "How bad?" "Bad enough. This kind of storm in April, it could mean heavy snow, could mean hail, could mean both. We need to be ready." Within minutes, the household mobilized with the efficiency of people who'd learned to work together. James and Michael rode out with Ethan and Sam, racing against the darkening sky. Sarah helped Clara secure shutters and move firewood closer to the house. Frank brought the chickens into the barn, and Cooper checked the smokehouse and equipment shed for loose boards or gaps. The storm hit just as the riders returned with the last of the horses, a wall of wind and sleet that turned the world white in seconds. Clara stood at the window watching them dismount and run for shelter, counting heads frantically. Ethan, James, Michael, Sam, all accounted for, all safe. They gathered in the main house as the storm raged outside, the fire burning bright. The children pressed close together on the floor near the hearth. William was frightened, his small body trembling with each crack of thunder, until Ethan pulled him into his lap and held him secure. "You're safe," Ethan said quietly. "The house is solid. The animals are sheltered. We're all together. That's what matters." Clara watched this scene, her husband comforting her son, her other children calm and trusting because they believed the adults when they said everything would be fine, and felt something shift in her understanding of what family meant. It wasn't just blood or legal documents. It wasn't just shared meals or a common roof. It was this: the certainty that when storms came, literal or metaphorical, you wouldn't face them alone. It was the knowledge that someone else was watching, planning, protecting. It was the trust that allowed children to be children instead of tiny adults carrying adult burdens. The storm lasted through the night. When morning came, the world was transformed. Snow in April, unusual but not unheard of in Montana, covering everything in white. But the damage was minimal. The barn had lost a few shingles, and one section of fence was down, but the animals were safe, the house intact, the family whole. "Could have been worse," Frank observed as they surveyed the damage. "Could have been a lot worse." That became a kind of motto for Clara as the months passed. Could have been worse. When Rebecca got a fever that lasted 3 terrifying days, but broke before it turned into something serious, could have been worse. When Michael fell from a horse and broke his arm, but it healed straight and clean, could have been worse. When a dry summer threatened the water supply, but August rains came just in time, could have been worse. Clara was learning to accept good fortune without waiting for disaster to follow. It was harder than she'd expected, this business of trusting that life could be stable, that happiness wasn't a temporary condition to be snatched away at any moment. But slowly, day by day, she was learning. Summer brought another change, one Clara noticed first in the mornings, when certain smells made her stomach turn. She recognized the signs immediately. She'd been pregnant 6 times before, after all. But this time the knowledge filled her with something entirely different from the fear and resignation she'd felt with her previous pregnancies. She told Ethan one evening after the children were asleep, the two of them sitting on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Ethan turned to her, his expression moving through surprise to something that looked like wonder. "You're sure?" "Very sure. About 3 months along, I think. I wasn't certain at first, but now—" She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "I'm certain." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a tenderness that made Clara's eyes sting. "A baby," he said softly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know 6 children is already a lot. Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Ethan pulled back to look at her face. "Clara, this is everything. A child we made together out of love instead of obligation. A child who'll grow up knowing nothing but security and family. How could I be anything but thrilled?" Clara felt tears spill over. "I was so afraid with the others. Every pregnancy was another mouth to feed, another responsibility we couldn't afford. But this time it's joy," Ethan finished. "Pure, uncomplicated joy." They told the children the next morning at breakfast. The reactions varied. Sarah was delighted, immediately planning how she'd help with the baby. James looked pleased but slightly embarrassed, the way adolescent boys often were about such things. Michael wanted to know if it would be a brother or a sister, and William announced that if it was a boy, they should name it after him, because William was an excellent name. Rebecca, now walking and getting into everything, seemed unconcerned with the news and continued trying to steal bacon off Michael's plate. "So we're okay with this?" Clara asked, looking around the table. "Having another sibling." "Are you kidding?" Sarah said. "This is wonderful, Mama. A baby that gets to grow up here with all of us. A baby that never has to know what it's like to be hungry or scared or uncertain. That's the best thing I can imagine." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and into fall. Clara's body, better nourished than it had been during her previous pregnancies, handled the changes with relative ease. Ethan was attentive without being overbearing, adjusting her workload without making her feel useless, ensuring she rested without treating her like an invalid. The ranch thrived. The cattle herd had grown, and Ethan was able to hire 2 more hands to help with the expanded operation. This meant more mouths to feed, but it also meant Clara could step back from some of the heavier work as her pregnancy advanced. Sarah took over much of the cooking with surprising skill, and the older boys handled chores that would have been Clara's responsibility. In October, nearly a year after Clara's arrival at the ranch, a letter came from back east. Clara's sister Margaret, who she hadn't heard from in 5 years, had somehow tracked her down. The letter was brief but warm, expressing shock at hearing about Clara's divorce and remarriage, relief that she and the children were safe and well, and tentative hope that they might rebuild their relationship. Margaret included an address and an invitation to write back. Clara sat with the letter for a long time, emotions warring within her. Margaret represented a life she'd left behind, a family that had largely abandoned her when she'd married Thomas against their wishes. But the letter also represented possibility, the chance to reconnect with her past on her own terms. "What do you think?" she asked Ethan that evening, showing him the letter. "I think that's your decision entirely," Ethan said. "But I will say this, you're not the same woman who left the East all those years ago. You're stronger, braver, more certain of yourself. If you want to rebuild that relationship, you can do it from a position of strength, not weakness. You're not running back to them for help. You're choosing whether to let them back into your life." Clara thought about that distinction and realized Ethan was right. She didn't need Margaret or her family back east. She wanted the connection, which was entirely different. So she wrote back, a careful letter explaining her new life, introducing Ethan and describing the ranch, making it clear that she was happy and settled and not looking for rescue or approval, just connection with family who might be interested in being part of her life again. The response came 6 weeks later, warm and enthusiastic, full of questions about the children and congratulations on the coming baby. Margaret included a photograph of her own family, a husband and 3 children Clara had never met. It was strange and wonderful, this rebuilding of bridges long burned. November arrived with the first serious snow, and with it came Clara's 32nd birthday. She'd forgotten about it entirely, too focused on preparing for the baby due in late December, but the children and Ethan hadn't forgotten. She came into the kitchen that morning to find the table set with wildflowers someone had managed to find somewhere, and a cake that Sarah had baked in secret, and small gifts from each child, a drawing from William, a carved wooden spoon from Michael, a book of poetry from James, a jar of preserves from Sarah, and a necklace made of polished stones from Rebecca with Sarah's help. Ethan's gift was last, a beautiful wool shawl in deep green that he'd ordered from somewhere, soft as a cloud and warm as a hug. "Happy birthday," he said simply. Clara cried, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, by the fact that these people had conspired to celebrate her when she'd spent so many years feeling like her existence was a burden rather than a blessing. "Thank you," she managed through tears. "All of you. This is the best birthday I've ever had." "Better than your 10th?" William asked seriously. "Mama, you must have had some good birthdays before." Clara laughed. "I did, but this one is special because I'm celebrating with people who chose to love me, not just people who were obligated to. That makes all the difference." December came fast, and with it the final weeks of Clara's pregnancy. She was huge, uncomfortable, and increasingly anxious about the upcoming birth despite having done this 6 times before. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked Ethan one sleepless night, the baby kicking energetically beneath her ribs. "Then we'll handle it," Ethan said, his hand warm on her belly, feeling their child move. "We've got the midwife arranged, Frank's wife is on call to help, and if anything seems complicated, we'll get you to the doctor in Ashford. But Clara, you've done this 6 times. Your body knows what to do." "This feels different," Clara whispered. "The others. I was scared, but I was also resigned. This time I want this baby so much it terrifies me. What if wanting it isn't enough?" Ethan pulled her close. "Wanting has nothing to do with outcomes. But having people who care about you, having good food and rest and support, that makes a real difference. You're healthier now than you've ever been. This baby has every advantage the others didn't." Labor started on a cold December night, 2 weeks before Christmas. Clara woke to contractions that were already strong and regular, and by the time she roused Ethan, she knew this baby was coming fast. The household mobilized. Frank's wife Mary arrived within the hour, calm and experienced, taking charge with the kind of authority that Clara found deeply comforting. Sarah took the younger children to the bunkhouse with instructions to stay there until called. James and Michael helped Ethan boil water and gather supplies, then retreated when Mary shooed them out. The labor was hard, but not impossibly so. Clara's body, stronger now than during her previous pregnancies, handled the work with grim efficiency. Mary coached her through contractions, and Ethan stayed by her side despite Mary's suggestion that he might prefer to wait elsewhere. "I'm staying," he'd said firmly. "This is my child being born. I want to be here." Just after midnight, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Clara's 7th child entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to everyone in the house. "A boy," Mary announced, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. "Healthy lungs on this one, and look at all that dark hair." Clara looked down at her son, hers and Ethan's, conceived in love and born into security, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and absolutely perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the family." Ethan touched the baby's impossibly small hand, his expression awed. "He's beautiful. You're beautiful. I can't believe—" His voice broke. "We made this. Together." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They'd discussed names but never settled on one, wanting to see the baby first. Now, looking at this new little person who would grow up knowing nothing but love and stability, Clara knew exactly what he should be called. "Joseph," she said. "After your father, Joseph Caldwell." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Your father gave you life and taught you to be a good man. Those gifts led you to us. It's the right name." The children were allowed in to meet their new brother once Clara had been cleaned up and the baby swaddled. They crowded around the bed, 6 pairs of eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in Clara's arms. "He's so small," William breathed. "Was I ever that small?" "Smaller," Clara said. "You were a tiny thing." "Can I hold him?" Sarah asked, and Clara saw the longing in her daughter's face. "Of course. Here, sit down and I'll pass him to you." They took turns holding Joseph, even James, who tried to act too old and cool for such things, but cradled his baby brother with surprising gentleness. Michael announced that he would teach Joseph to fish as soon as he was old enough. William promised to share his toys. Rebecca, still a baby herself, seemed uncertain about this new competition for attention, but was eventually won over by Joseph's tiny fingers grasping hers. "He's part of all of us," Sarah said softly. "He's got Mama and Ethan's blood, but he's also got us. We'll all help raise him, teach him, protect him. That's what families do." Clara looked around at her children, her 7 children now, and at Ethan standing among them, and felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. This was what she'd been fighting for all those months ago when Thomas left. This moment, this family, this bone-deep certainty that they all belonged to each other. Christmas that year was simple but joyful. Joseph was only a week old, sleeping most of the time, but his presence transformed everything. The children were gentler with each other, more aware of how precious and fragile life could be. Ethan was soft-eyed and tender, dividing his attention between Clara's recovery and the ranch work that never stopped. On Christmas morning, they gathered in the main room, the fire burning bright, the tree decorated with strings of berries and paper ornaments the children had made. There were small gifts, practical things mostly, warm socks and books and tools. But the greatest gift was intangible, the knowledge that they were safe, together, and certain of tomorrow in a way none of them had been a year ago. "I want to say something," James announced, standing up with the awkward formality of a boy trying to be a man. "Last Christmas, we were in the cabin with Papa, and everything was falling apart. We were hungry and cold, and Mama was trying so hard to hold everything together. I remember thinking that we probably wouldn't survive to see another Christmas." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "But we did survive. Because of Mama's strength and Ethan's kindness, and because we all refused to give up. This Christmas, having enough food, being warm, having a new baby brother, knowing we're safe, it's everything I prayed for last year but didn't really believe could happen. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for being the family I needed." Clara was crying before James finished, and she wasn't alone. Sarah wiped at her eyes, and even Ethan cleared his throat roughly. Michael nodded vigorously, too moved to speak. "We're the family we all needed," Clara said when she could speak. "Every single one of us brought something essential to this. We built this together." The winter passed peacefully. Joseph grew, thrived, developed a personality that was somehow both serious and joyful. The ranch survived the cold months with minimal difficulty. The children continued their education, formal lessons in the mornings, practical experience in the afternoons. Sarah talked about becoming a teacher someday. James wanted to run his own ranch. Michael dreamed of building things. William was still figuring himself out, trying different interests each week. And Clara settled into her new life with a contentment she'd never expected to feel. The work was still hard. Raising 7 children and managing a household never stopped being work. But it was good work, meaningful work, work that filled her days with purpose instead of dread. Spring came again, the second spring since Clara's arrival at the ranch. The valley turned green, wildflowers bloomed, and the cattle were driven to higher pastures for summer grazing. James and Michael went on their first real cattle drive, 6 days in the high country with Ethan and the hands, and came back sunburned and proud and full of stories. One warm May evening, Clara stood on the porch watching the sunset, Joseph drowsy on her shoulder, and took stock of her life. 2 years ago, she'd been married to a man who would abandon her. She'd been living on a failing homestead with no future. She'd been starving, desperate, certain she'd failed her children in every way that mattered. Now she was married to a man who loved her. She was living on a thriving ranch that felt like home. She was healthy, her children were thriving, and she'd given birth to a son conceived in love rather than obligation. The transformation was so complete, so overwhelming, that sometimes she still couldn't quite believe it was real. "You're thinking too hard," Ethan said, emerging from the house to join her. "I can hear your brain working from inside." Clara smiled, just reflecting on how different everything is from 2 years ago. Better different or worse different? So much better, it's almost frightening. Sometimes I wake up expecting it to be gone, to find out it was all a dream. Ethan wrapped his arms around her and the baby, solid and warm and real. It's not a dream. It's our life, the one we built together from the wreckage of what came before. That night, after the children were asleep and Joseph was settled in his cradle, Clara and Ethan lay in bed talking quietly. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to the homestead that day?" Clara asked. "If you'd never made that offer?" "All the time," Ethan admitted, "and it terrifies me, because I know what would have happened. You would have tried to make it to Ashford with the children, would have tried to find work or charity or something, and Montana winters being what they are." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. "You saved us," Clara said simply. "We saved each other," Ethan corrected. "I was alone, Clara, building this ranch, working myself to exhaustion, and for what? So I could die alone with a successful business nobody cared about? You and the children gave me purpose beyond profit. You gave me a family. That's not saving, that's transformation." Clara thought about that, about how rescue wasn't always one-directional, how sometimes the person offering help needed it just as much as the person receiving it. "Then we transformed each other," she said. "Is that fair?" "That's exactly right." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, illnesses and accidents, conflicts and difficulties. Joseph got croup when he was 2 and scared everyone half to death before recovering. Sarah struggled through adolescence with all its attendant dramas. James broke his leg falling from a horse and spent 6 frustrated weeks learning patience. A particularly bad winter storm killed 10 head of cattle and nearly destroyed the barn, but they faced everything together. When one person faltered, the others held them up. When resources were tight, they made do. When tragedy struck, they grieved together and then rebuilt. The children grew. Sarah did become a teacher, opening a small school in Ashford that served ranching families throughout the valley. James took over increasing responsibilities on the ranch, his skill with cattle earning respect from men twice his age. Michael became a carpenter, his furniture sought after across 3 counties. William discovered a talent for veterinary work and apprenticed with the doctor in Ashford. Rebecca grew into a spirited girl with her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. And Joseph, the baby born into security and love, grew up never knowing hunger or fear or uncertainty. He was gentle and thoughtful, with Ethan's calm demeanor and Clara's fierce loyalty to family. 10 years after that first desperate morning when Clara woke to find Thomas gone, she stood in the same valley watching her children, all 7 of them, working together during spring roundup. James and Michael were on horseback, helping Ethan and the hands move cattle. Sarah had ridden out to bring lunch, Rebecca beside her. William was tending to a calf with an injured leg, his young face serious with concentration. Joseph, now 9, was helping Frank repair tack, his small hands surprisingly skilled. Clara felt Ethan come up beside her, his presence as familiar now as her own heartbeat. "Look at them," she said softly. "Look at what we built." "What you built," Ethan said. "You're the foundation, Clara. Your strength, your refusal to give up when everything looked hopeless. That's what made all this possible." Clara shook her head. "We built it together. You gave us the space to heal and grow. I brought the determination to survive. The children brought resilience and adaptability. We all contributed." They stood together watching their family work, and Clara thought about the woman she'd been a decade ago, broken, desperate, certain she'd failed at everything that mattered. She thought about Thomas's abandonment, about the letter that said he couldn't watch them starve, about the months of terror and uncertainty. And she thought about how the worst thing that had ever happened to her had also been the catalyst for the best thing. If Thomas hadn't left, she'd never have found the strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd never have learned that she could survive anything, could rebuild from nothing, could create a life better than any she'd imagined. If Thomas hadn't left, she'd never have met Ethan, never have discovered what a real partnership looked like, never have experienced the kind of love that was built on respect and trust rather than obligation and resentment. If Thomas hadn't left, her children would have grown up watching their parents struggle and fail, would have learned that life was hard and unfair and offered no rewards for effort. Instead, they'd learned that challenges could be overcome, that families could heal, that endings could become beginnings. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked, as if reading her thoughts. "The hard parts, I mean. The struggle to get here." Clara considered the question honestly. "No," she said finally. "I regret what the children went through, the fear and hunger and uncertainty. I regret the years I wasted with Thomas trying to make something work that was doomed from the start. But I don't regret the journey that brought us here. Every difficult moment taught us something. Every challenge we survived made us stronger. This life, our life, it means more because we had to fight for it." That evening, with all the children gathered around the dinner table, bigger now, expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, Clara looked at each beloved face and felt a gratitude so profound it took her breath away. James, nearly 20 now, discussing cattle prices with Ethan. Sarah, home for the weekend from her teaching position, helping Rebecca with her reading. Michael, showing William a new joinery technique he'd learned. Joseph, telling an elaborate story about the barn cat's adventures that had the younger children giggling. This was her family, not the one she'd been born into, not the one she'd tried to create with Thomas, but the one she'd chosen and built and fought for. "Mama," Joseph said, interrupting her thoughts, "you're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you look at all of us like you're trying to memorize us. Sarah says you do it because you're remembering when times were hard and you want to appreciate how good we have it now." Clara glanced at Sarah, who shrugged with a small smile. "I'm not wrong, am I?" "No," Clara admitted. "You're not wrong. I do remember the hard times. But not because I want to dwell on them, because they make me appreciate everything we have now even more." "Tell us about it," William said suddenly. "About when Thomas left. About how you and Ethan met. We know bits and pieces, but I want to hear the whole story." Clara looked at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly, so she told them, all of it. The morning she woke to find Thomas gone. The inventory of their meager supplies. The 3 days of desperate uncertainty before Ethan and Frank arrived. The ride to the ranch, the months of work and healing, Thomas's return, and Judge Morrison's intervention. The wedding, the adoption, Joseph's birth, and everything that followed. The children listened in rapt silence. Even the oldest ones, who'd lived through it, seemed to hear it differently now, understanding layers of complexity they'd been too young to grasp at the time. When Clara finished, James spoke first. "I remember being so angry at Thomas, at our father, for leaving us. But now I think—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Now I think maybe it was the best thing he could have done for us. Because if he'd stayed, we'd have all stayed stuck in that failing homestead, slowly starving, slowly dying. His leaving forced us to find something better." "Doesn't excuse what he did," Michael said firmly. "Abandoning your family is wrong, no matter what comes after." "No, it doesn't excuse it," Clara agreed. "What Thomas did was cruel and cowardly. But Michael's also right that something good came from it. Not because of what Thomas did, but because of what we chose to do after. We could have given up. We could have let despair win. Instead, we fought. We survived. We built something beautiful from the wreckage. That's on us, not on him." "Where's he now?" Rebecca asked softly. "Thomas. Do you know?" Clara shook her head. "I don't. And I don't need to know. That part of my life is over. This is my life now. All of you, this ranch, this family. Thomas is just a chapter that's closed." Later, when the children had scattered to their various evening activities and Clara and Ethan sat alone in the gathering dusk, she said, "Thank you for not minding, that I told them everything." "Why would I mind? It's their history. They deserve to know it. Some of it reflects badly on me. The fact that I stayed with Thomas so long, that I didn't leave earlier." "Clara." Ethan took her hand. "You stayed because you're loyal and because you believed in commitment and because leaving with 6 children and no resources would have been suicide. There's no shame in that. And those children know that. They see your strength, not your perceived failures." Clara leaned into him, this man who'd spent a decade proving that good men existed, that love could be steady and reliable, that partnership meant shouldering burdens together rather than blaming each other for their weight. "I love you. she said simply. I love you too. Always have, always will. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, one of the children was playing piano. Sarah had insisted on lessons for all of them, and the house frequently rang with music now, sometimes skillful, sometimes painfully amateur, but always enthusiastic. Clara thought about the future, about the grandchildren who would eventually come, about the legacy they were building here. She thought about Sarah's students who would grow up educated because her daughter had chosen teaching, about the families who would live in homes furnished with Michael's careful carpentry, about the animals William would heal, about the ranch James would one day run, about Rebecca's bright future still unwritten, about Joseph who would grow up never doubting that he was loved and wanted. We did good, she said softly. We did, Ethan agreed, and we're not done yet. He was right. There were years ahead still, challenges to face, joys to experience, sorrows to endure. Life didn't stop surprising you just because you'd found happiness. But Clara had learned something essential over the past decade. She was strong enough to handle whatever came. She wasn't alone. She had a partner who stood beside her, children who would support her, and a life she'd built with her own hands and heart and stubborn refusal to surrender. Her husband had left her with 6 children and nothing else. A cowboy had stepped in and said, "They're mine now." And together, they'd built something neither of them could have created alone. A family that was messy and complicated and absolutely real, bound not by blood or obligation, but by choice and love, and the shared experience of surviving the worst and choosing to build something beautiful from it. Clara Caldwell, the name still gave her a quiet thrill even after 10 years, was living proof that endings could be beginnings, that the worst moments could lead to the best ones, that losing everything could teach you what actually mattered. She'd been abandoned, she'd been saved, she'd been transformed, but most importantly, she'd saved herself. Everything that came after, Ethan, the ranch, the life they'd built, was wonderful and essential and deeply cherished. But it was possible because Clara had refused to give up, had fought for her children, had chosen to keep going when everything looked hopeless. That was the story she wanted her children to remember. Not that a man rescued them, but that their mother had been strong enough to accept help when it was offered, wise enough to recognize a good man when she met one, and brave enough to rebuild her life from absolute ruin. And now, a decade later, sitting beside her husband while their children's laughter floated through the warm evening air, Clara finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not rescue, not security, not even happiness, though she had that in abundance. What she'd been searching for was the freedom to choose her own life, to write her own story, to become the person she was always capable of being but had never had the space to discover. Thomas's abandonment had given her that space, though not in any way he'd intended. Ethan's offer had given her the resources and support to use it. Her children's resilience had given her the motivation to keep going. Her own strength, that stubborn, fierce, unbreakable core she'd discovered in herself, had done the rest. This was her life. Not perfect, not without challenges, but hers in a way nothing had ever been before. She'd chosen it, built it, and defended it, and she would continue to choose it every single day for as long as she lived. The Montana sky deepened to indigo, stars multiplying overhead. Inside the house, someone called for Clara to come settle a dispute about whose turn it was to wash dishes. Ethan squeezed her hand once before they rose to go inside, back to the beautiful chaos of family life. Clara paused in the doorway, taking one last look at the valley that had become her home, and smiled. Her husband had left believing she would fail. A cowboy had stepped in and offered her a chance. Together, they'd built a family that never broke again. And Clara had discovered that the most important rescue had been the one she'd given herself, the decision to survive, to fight, to believe that better days were possible even when everything suggested otherwise. That belief had been justified. Those better days had come, and they were still unfolding, one precious moment at a time.